Chapter 67. As Ding Ning cut down like he was chopping wood, the two sides of the armored lizard's neck were cut open. Its body and front limbs moved slower and slower. In the end, when its head was about to fall off, it stopped moving completely. Ding Ning panted violently. Limited by his cultivation, his arms were starting to ache. The exhaustion of his physical energy caused him to feel tired. But he knew he did not have time to stop. Looking at the bloody armored lizard, he squatted down and used the last flower remnant sword in his hand as a pry bar to pry off the scales on the lizard's back. Then, he carefully started to cut the flesh. For him, it had been a long time since he had killed this type of beast for its flesh, so he still couldn't help but feel a bit disgusted. Most importantly, the armored lizard's organs, especially its stomach, were filled with poison and filth that could make cultivators sick. That was why he had to control his sword so that it didn't penetrate too deeply so that he wouldn't cut through the organs when cutting the flesh. Seeing him carefully cut the flesh, a student from Baiyun Monastery like Xie Chongxing recovered from his shock. He could not help but sigh softly. He seems to know a lot. Su Heshan took a deep breath and said slowly, "There are many books in the alleys." Ku Shichuan's eyebrows rose again, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that Su Heshan's words were a counterattack against him. This was an old saying of the Qin dynasty that had two meanings. One meaning was that people born in the alleys rarely had a chance to become cultivators. So most of them could only study and seek a way to become strategists. The other meaning was that it was precisely because it was harder for those who were born in the streets to become cultivators than nobles, that those who wanted to become cultivators would have an even greater thirst for cultivation knowledge. They would eagerly read any cultivation-related book they could find. So many cultivators born in the alleys knew more. Especially after they became cultivators, they would cherish all cultivation opportunities and work harder. Often, they would have great achievements. He started too late. Ku Shichuan thought for a moment. He felt that arguing over Ding Ning, who was still very far away from him, would be lowering his status. Thus, he finally calmed down and said softly. This sentence was very fair, and all the spectating students agreed in their hearts. They all fell silent. Even if Ding Ning had been born into an ordinary aristocratic family, with the talent he had shown, he could have stepped onto the path of cultivation 6 or 7 years ago. Moreover, his family would have given him all kinds of things that could help him in his cultivation. Yet, at his age, he had only cultivated for a month. Even though he had astounding cultivation talent, he was far behind He Zhaoxi, Ku Shichuan, and even Nangong Kaishu. Perhaps it was because of this natural gap of 6 to 7 years that he would always fall behind in all kinds of competitions in the future and would never be able to catch up. Su Heshan knew that this was the truth, and he couldn't refute it. He also sank into silence. However, he felt even more unjust, so he felt even more sullen in his heart, and his expression became even more unsightly. It's true that he started too late, but while we ordinary people walk, he ran with all his might. Yet at this time, a clear female voice with indescribable power sounded again and reached everyone's ears.
Xie Rose spoke at this time.
Her gaze never left Ding Ning's body. At this time, Ding Ning had finished cutting the meat from the armored lizard's back. The meat on the armored lizard's back was the thickest and most disgusting to eat, but also the cleanest and safest. He dealt with the 2 pieces of meat he had cut, dripped off some of the blood, and used cloth and vines to carry the 2 pieces of meat on his back. Because time was tight for him, he started to run towards the area where the smoke was rising. These 2 strips of meat added up to just over 10 kilograms. But because his body was weaker than other cultivators, and just now, he had experienced 2 fierce battles, especially after killing this armored lizard and cutting the meat, his breathing had not even stabilized. So it was especially difficult for him to run. Even the people on the viewing platform could clearly see Ding Ning's arms and legs tremble strangely. They could see his chest rise and fall violently, as though it was about to burst. The hot breath coming out of his mouth and the steam coming off his body caused layers of white mist to form in front of and around him. At this time, almost all the White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy disciples who had not been eliminated at the entrance were far ahead of Ding Ning. Some of the people who had progressed the smoothest were even close to the edge of the smoke-filled area and were about to reach the area they had to enter. Ding Ning lagged behind, feeling a little lonely. It was to the extent that everyone on the viewing platform could easily determine that with his current running speed, if there were no accidents, he would barely be able to enter the smoke-covered area before noon. But his difficult, tenacious, and calm running posture was enough to move people. They could feel a kind of power and resolve that many people did not have. Sierra's face was covered in a porcelain glow, but her eyes were as moved as the noon sun. Ding Ning had moved her. The light in her eyes moved even more people on the viewing platform. Ding Ning was running with difficulty. He was racing against time and chasing after the young geniuses of White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy who were close to the area they had to reach. His body was close to its limit. As he breathed, there seemed to be a fire burning in his chest. He felt unspeakably sad, but his gaze was calm and cool, and he looked far ahead. What Sierra and everyone else on the viewing platform did not know was that his pursuit had more meaning. He was chasing after his own life, and the powerful cultivators of Chongling, the marquises, the empress, the two ministers, and the high and mighty emperor of the Qin dynasty who had cultivated to realm 8. Just as Ding Ning was running with difficulty, a man dressed in yellow official robes with python patterns stood with his hands behind his back on a training field in a military camp. He looked coldly at the distant streets of Chongling. Because Chongling was too large, and he could not see the end, he appeared lost. This man's skin was smooth and gave off a yellow jade-like light. His forehead was wide, and his eyes contained a great presence, as though he could grasp the entire military camp at any time. He was naturally the general of the Tiger and Wolf Army, Liang Lian. At this time, a black-robed advisor in his 40s was standing next to him. Like the cultivator who had exclaimed that a general's success was built on 10,000 years of age, this black-robed advisor's hair was white, and his face was covered in the marks of wind and frost. "You really feel that I must do this?" Liang Lian looked into the distance and asked the silent and respectful advisor next to him. "General, you must do this." The black-robed advisor nodded and said softly. Liang Lian turned to look at him and said, "Using public resources for private purposes, using some methods to steal some resources from the people of Chongling. Even if you fail, you will at most cause the displeasure of the Empress and the Holy One. But letting go of someone like Bai Shanshui, not being able to get the lonely mountain soar horde, and even attempting to collude with Bai Shanshui, this is a true rebellion. The Holy One will be furious, and many heads will be lost." The black-robed advisor's expression did not change. He said softly and respectfully, "General, you know better than me what your footing in Chongling is. You and Bureau Chief Yi are the same. The reason you can live well and prominently is because the swords in your hands have enough weight, because you have value, and because you are strong." Liang Lian shook his head. "I am not like Yi's ceiling." The black-robed advisor also shook his head. "You had a relationship with that person. Since you betrayed that person, the Holy One will feel that you may betray him. So he has never trusted you like he trusted the 2 ministers and the 13 marquises. So do not think that you will be free of worries if you work for the Empress. If you really do as she and those nobles think, and let Bureau Chief Yi die gloriously in battle and get the lonely mountain soar horde for the Empress and the Holy One, then Bureau Chief Yi's path right now is your path." Liang Lian's expression did not change, but he remained silent. The fewer people like Bureau Chief Yi and Bai Shanshui, the more peaceful Chongling will be, and the less safe you will be. So you cannot easily let people like this disappear. Your footing will always come from your own strength. If you are strong enough, even if you cannot be made a marquis, you can at least guard a region outside the pass. The black-robed advisor slowly looked up and said slowly and firmly, "We climbed out of the pile of corpses outside the pass, when only the 2 of us were left in the city. We were not afraid. We worked hard to climb to our present position. So many people have died. General, are you afraid now? Everything we've done in the past is to be able to control our own path under our own feet. This is what you've always taught me." Liang Lian was silent for a long time. The autumn wind swept up the yellow sand on the practice field and covered him and the black-robed advisor. His expression turned gentle. He nodded and said to the black-robed advisor, "Yes." Chapter 68. His luck is really good. On the viewing platform, Ku Shichuan spoke slowly. It was noon. Under the gazes of all the spectators, Ding Ning, who was at the back, finally entered the area marked by the 4 lines of smoke. The moment he confirmed that he had entered the marked area, Ding Ning disregarded his image and sat on the ground. He took off the meat on his back and leaned against a small tree, panting heavily. The sweat that seeped out from his skin instantly soaked his clothes. This time, Ku Shichuan thought his words were just as fair. If they encountered 1 or 2 more armored lizards along the way, Ding Ning would not be able to arrive in time and would be eliminated. Yet, the moment he said this, he felt the gazes around him were inexplicably cold. He frowned slightly and quickly understood why the people around him had such emotions. However, he only sneered in his heart. The hard work and persistence of the weak could gain the admiration and sympathy of many people, but the final result would not change. At this time, only 1/3 of the people from White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy had reached the designated area. 2/3 had been eliminated on the way from the entrance to the Sword Trial Valley. In his view, White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy were too weak compared to their Shadow Mountain Sword Cave. Shui Wangxiu was sitting on a cushioned rattan chair at the edge of the viewing platform. His eyes were half closed as though he was about to fall asleep. If he knew what Ku Shichuan was thinking right now, he would definitely object. The strength of a sect was not determined by the number of Realm 3, 4, or even Realm 5 cultivators, but by the top cultivators of the sect. Sometimes, one true expert was enough. The autumn wind was cold, and the sweat-soaked clothing was more tiring, and it was easier to get sick. But Ding Ning's performance still won the respect of most people on the viewing platform. After a period of heavy panting, he started to try to make a fire. He prepared enough dried leaves and branches and rolled a ball of dried grass into a ball. Then, he used the sword in his hand to knock on the stone, creating sparks. After igniting the hay, he kept blowing on it. In just a few breaths, the fire was burning brightly. The fire burned brightly and was warm enough.
There was almost no smoke rising.
After cutting off several green vines, he took off his soaked robes and picked them up to roast. At the same time, he skewered the 2 pieces of meat that were heavy for him. Some of the workers of Green Vine Sword School had finished preparing food. Many food boxes were set up on the mountain path near the viewing platform. At this time, the scene in the Sword Trial Valley had started to calm. Many students had started to hide to rest and replenish their energy. Originally, many of the spectating students already had thoughts of going to eat. However, right at this time, several cries of surprise sounded. As a result, the people who were originally about to cross the vine bridge and walk to the mountain path all stopped in their tracks. Near one of the pillars of smoke, 2 figures were about to meet. Moreover, both of them were likely to win in the end. One of them was tall and handsome. It was Su Qin of White Goat Cave. The other person was of ordinary stature, but there was no extra fat on his body. His movements were filled with indescribable power. It was He Zhaoxi who had killed the armored lizard with 2 blows. The 2 were on each other's path. They were only separated by a patch of forest, and neither of them seemed to have any intentions of stopping to rest. If the 2 of them were to meet, who would emerge victorious? The breathing of everyone on the viewing platform involuntarily became slightly heavy. When the trees in front of them thinned, He Zhaoxi and Su Qin saw each other at the same time. The 2 stopped a dozen feet apart. Su Qin's brows furrowed slightly. His expression did not change as his right hand slowly landed on the sword hilt at his waist. His knuckles were slightly white. He Zhaoxi's eyes narrowed slightly. He slowly pulled out the yellow longsword on his back. Yet in the next moment, Su Qin and everyone on the viewing platform narrowed their eyes. He did not prepare to attack, but cut off a piece of the armored lizard's meat. Just like Ding Ning, he had taken the meat from the armored lizard's back. However, he was much stronger than Ding Ning, so the amount of meat he cut off was twice as much as Ding Ning. After entering this area, he hadn't started a fire yet, so the meat on his back was still raw. At this moment, the piece of meat that was cut off was still dripping with blood. I know you. You are Su Qin. Your cultivation should be above Realm 3 second class. Looking at Su Qin's cold words, he directly put this piece of raw meat half the size of a fist that was still bleeding into his mouth, and started to chew and swallow. What is he doing? This action caused many people on the viewing platform to gasp. Xie Chongqing turned his head and asked Su Heshan and Xiero with a pale face. Thinking of the appearance of those armored lizards just now, he felt nauseous. Xiero and Su Heshan shook their heads. With He Zhaoxi's personality, he would not use such a method to disgust or intimidate his opponent. Su Qin's gaze grew sharper. He looked at He Zhaoxi, who was eating raw meat, and said with slight disdain, I know a way for cultivators to digest large amounts of raw meat and not get sick even if they eat large amounts. That is intense exercise. Continuous intense exercise to make the energies in one's body flourish, to make one's organs stronger, and increase one's body temperature. But even if you have such thoughts and feel that you want to fight me, and then think of eating meat after seeing me, do you think I will have the patience to wait for you to finish eating this meat? He Zhaoxi continued to cut and eat the meat piece by piece. At the same time, he said, compared to you directly deciding the victor now, I feel there is a better choice. Su Qin sneered. What better choice? I do not want to waste time. The less time I spend on the first 5 realms, the more time I have for breakthroughs after Realm 5. This is just a trial. I do not want to spend too much time here, He Zhaoxi said calmly. If it is something that can be resolved in 1 or 2 days, why wait until the 3rd day? Su Qin stilled. He thought of a possibility. He Zhaoxi looked at him and said, 2 lions catching sheep is much faster than 1 lion catching sheep. Su Qin's eyebrows were still raised. The coldness in his eyes did not lessen, but a hint of a smile appeared on his face. So your suggestion is for us to hunt together? He looked with interest at He Zhaoxi. I do not know how much will be left before the sky turns dark. He Zhaoxi continued to eat raw meat. Or we can decide the victor now. The corners of Su Qin's mouth curled up slightly as he looked up. I will accept your suggestion because I don't have much patience. Also, I don't like to be watched like a monkey. He Zhaoxi looked at the little forest in front of him and nodded. He said, with this as the boundaries? Su Qin said coolly, with this as the boundary. He Zhaoxi did not say anything else. He continued to eat meat as though he wanted to finish all the raw meat in one go. At the same time, he turned and started to run. Su Qin also turned and started to leisurely advance. What are they doing? Xie Chongqing asked with a cold expression. Even from so far away, he could see that He Zhaoxi was not running out of fear of Su Qin, but because the two had reached an agreement in their conversation just now. Divide and eat. Su Heshan took a deep breath and said slowly as he looked at Xie Chongqing. Xie Chongqing was stunned, and then reacted. Indeed, if he could directly capture all the other competitors in this circle, this kind of trial could end directly, and it would not take 3 days at all. But this is also very dangerous, he said with an ugly expression. His expression was unsightly as he said, if you keep fighting, your condition won't be good. You might even get injured and lose to someone who is weaker than you. Su Heshan nodded and glanced at him. He said softly, you are right. But Su Qin is proud, He Zhaoxi is confident. Xie Chongqing took a deep breath. Theoretically, Su Qin and He Zhaoxi's choice had nothing to do with him. The dull and boring time that followed would be greatly reduced. Yet at some unknown time, he had started to hope that Ding Ning could go further. Deep inside, he even hoped that Ding Ning would win in the end. A white goat cave student who was picking golden oranges from a wild orange tree suddenly sensed something. He shot forward and flashed to the back of the tree. Seeing the person in his sight, his expression relaxed slightly. He instinctively called out, Senior Sect Brother Su Qin. Yet in the next moment, he saw Su Qin's hand gripping the hilt of his sword. His expression froze. Since this is a fair trial, there must be a fair competition between fellow sect members. Apologies. After Su Qin said these words, he attacked. There was a soft hiss. The thin mist in front of him was pushed aside, and a bright passage appeared. A purple sword light jumped out of his left sleeve. Unlike ordinary cultivators, he wielded his sword with his left hand. His sword was very long, a foot longer than ordinary long swords. Also, his sword that flashed with purple flames was very soft. When this sword light stabbed in front of the White Goat Cave student, the White Goat Cave student drew his sword in shock and blocked this sword light. Yet this sword light suddenly curved, the soft blade forming a semicircle. With a pop, it hit the White Goat Cave student's neck. This White Goat Cave student took multiple steps back and fainted on the ground. Su Qi nodded in apology. He took down the 2 tokens hanging from the White Goat Cave student's waist and continued to advance. At the same time, in another place, there was a muffled, thunderous explosion, and a circular air wave visible to the naked eye spread out, as if a passage had been smashed open in space. A figure flew backwards miserably and crashed into the wall of vines behind him. He could no longer get up. Directly opposite him, behind the ring of air, He Xiaoxi put away his sword and continued to run. He had chewed and swallowed all the raw meat he had been carrying. At this time, his stomach was bulging. As he ran, his stomach gave off a toad-like sound. Chapter 69. This kind of trial is slightly childish. But because we are all childish students, this kind of trial and competition is very suitable for us. But He Xiaoxi is not childish at all. Xie Chongqing's stomach also emitted a faint thunderous sound, but he was hungry. But he did not go to the mountain path to get food, and said to Su Heshan next to him. His words seemed a bit ridiculous and boring, but Su Heshan could understand his feelings at the moment. Ding Ning and He Xiaoxi's performance must have given Xie Chongqing a great feeling. It seems we need to work harder. Otherwise, we will be left further behind by He Xiaoxi and Ku Shichuan. Su Heshan nodded and then said softly, Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning are in danger. Xie Chongqing took a deep breath and said seriously, while I know there is not much possibility, I still hope the 2 of them can win. In their worried gazes, Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning happened to be on He Xiaoxi's side. Nangong Kaishu was walking in the thin mist. Compared to most people in this valley, she had been very lucky before. Other than encountering 2 vine traps, she had not encountered other White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy disciples, nor had she been attacked by armored lizards. However, this also meant that she couldn't rest today. She still had to find enough food, and at least one battle with the other disciples. Suddenly, she stopped walking, because at this moment, a low rumbling sound could be faintly heard in the wind. The formations in the Sword Trial Valley could cause the primal energies of the universe to become chaotic. Even sound waves would be disrupted to the greatest extent. Ordinary vibrations in the air and on the ground could not be sensed. At this time, she could clearly hear the low sound. This meant that the sound had been very loud and should be very close to her.
He Xiaoxi.
She thought for a moment and almost instinctively called out this name. The wind suddenly picked up. Waves of faint blue mist were blown into thin muslin by the wind. A somewhat wild figure rushed out of the thin mist in front of her, carrying countless fallen leaves that were swept away by him. It really is you? Nangong Saishu's face was cold. Her right hand slowly moved to the sword hilt on her back. The wild figure stomped his feet on the ground. A circle of wind and waves rolled out, and he stood still. At this time, He Xiaoxi's chest was completely exposed. Fine beads of sweat seeped out of his slightly red skin and were immediately dried by his body temperature. His abdomen was still emitting the croaking sound of a toad. His eyes burned with fighting spirit. He looked at Nangong Kaishu and said sincerely, Actually, I did not want to meet you. It's only because he thinks that I have a chance of entering the top 3, not because he thinks that he can't defeat me. Fighting spirit burned in Nangong Saishi's eyes. She slowly pulled out her iron sword and held it in front of her. I don't like your way of thinking. Even if you want to give way now that we have met, I think you must fight. Also, I have wanted to fight you for a long time to see the difference between us. But before I had a breakthrough, there was a major realm between us. I was afraid of losing so badly that I did not feel anything. He Xiaoxi held his yellow sword in front of him and said, I am in good condition, and my cultivation is higher than yours. So I will give you a handicap of 3 moves. Up to you, that is just what you think. Nangong Kaishu started to move. A wild wind formed under her feet, blowing away the dry leaves and dirt on the ground to reveal the hard yellow earth below. She started a charge in a straight line, just like when she had fought Li Lingjuan's subordinate, Chen Moli. But because she was in vital energy realm now, the scene was very different from back then. Streams of vital essence rapidly flowed out from her fingertips, continuously pouring into the fish-patterned iron sword in her hand. All of the fish scale patterns on this black iron sword began to be filled with a dazzling and viscous silver light. It looked as if the inside of this sword was filled with large amounts of silver water that was about to seep out from these patterns. However, it just could not seep out. The iron sword itself seemed unable to withstand this kind of power. The body of the sword that had been slightly bent due to the battle started to straighten, and then started to tremble violently, giving off silver light. In a breath, this black iron sword seemed to become a large silver fish in Nangong Saishu's hand.
Poof.
The large silver fish swayed more violently in Nangong Saishu's hand. It finally broke free and jumped back into the water with a soft sound. All the silver light left Nangong Saishu's hand and flew forward. In the air, there was a fish-like silver sword light jumping forward towards He Xiaoxi, who was 50 feet away. The black iron sword was in Nangong Saishu's hand. Secret fish sword form? He Xiaoxi made a sound of surprise that Nangong Kaishu did not use the City Connect sword art passed down in the family. As he made a sound of surprise, he swung his sword forward as though he was casually swinging it in the air in front of him. His withered yellow sword drew an arc in the air. But a bright and transparent sword energy lit up at the tip of the long sword. This sword energy flew in a straight line towards Nangong Kaishu at an astounding speed. In this moment, he did not defend and counterattacked. His sword was faster than Nangong Saishu's. It broke through the air and was less than 2 feet from Nangong Saishu's eyes. At this time, the large silver fish jumping in the air was still 10 feet away from him. Facing the other's attack while Nangong Kaishu was still moving forward, this attack was the hardest to defend against. Nangong Saishu's pupils contracted violently. Fortunately, she still had a sword. When this bright and transparent sword light was only a foot away from her forehead, a green sword light finally flew out from her left sleeve. Several green vine-like sword lights finally blocked in front of this transparent sword light. There was an explosion. Nangong Kaishu instinctively closed her eyes and stopped her body. The shattered sword energy and wind blew her hair back and even left bloody marks on her white face.
Boom.
It was also at this moment that she sensed that the silver fish was sent flying by a yellow turbid wave. A section of a yellow sword came out of the wave and slashed at her with astounding speed. At the start, He Xiaoxi had said he would let her have 3 moves. Now that the two started to fight, He Xiaoxi clearly did not give way. But Nangong Kaishu knew that this was not He Xiaoxi's deception. He Xiaoxi understood her intentions and chose to respect her. Before she could avert her eyes, she crossed her swords in front of her. Vital energy surged into the swords. A yellow ball of light, a silver and a green ball of light crossed in the air. Another muffled thunder sounded in the valley. A circular shockwave visible to the naked eye spread outwards and blew away the surrounding vines and leaves. He Xiaoxi's advancing figure stopped abruptly. The soles of his shoes gave off unpleasant cracking sounds. His cloth shoes shattered into many pieces. In front of him, Nangong Saishu's body was thrown backwards. She made a hole in the vines and bushes behind her as she fell hard to the ground. Blood sprayed on the ground in front of Nangong Kaishu. But she still gripped her swords tightly and did not let go of them. Beads of blood seeped out of her robes, but she did not make a sound. She struggled to stand up. He Xiaoxi's expression was grave, but he did not say anything. He held his sword in front of him and said seriously, "Please." Nangong Kaishu started to run again. Her body once again created a straight path in the mist. The sword hilt that was soaked in blood once again gave off a dazzling light. She attacked with both swords. The vital energy flowing into the seal scripts on the swords gathered some primal energies of the universe and flew out. A patch of green vines grew densely in front of her. Silver light flashed through the gaps between the green vines. But it was not a large silver fish charging out, but countless silver scale-like sword lights. It was harder to use two sword moves at the same time than one. This was why few people in the Green Vine Sword Academy could use dual swords like Nangong Kaishu. But facing Nangong Saishu's attack, He Xiaoxi only attacked once. His sword rotated horizontally and slapped forward horizontally. This seemed to be a method of using strength to break through the path. Yet the power of this blow was not enough to completely seal all of Nangong Saishu's sword lights. Therefore, many people in the stands who were watching this battle were puzzled. Yet at this moment, He Xiaoxi's body underwent a strange change. The skin on the left side of his body turned yellow in an instant, while the right side of his body was full of vitality. It was like a tree with half of its body withered, and the other half absorbed the vitality of the other half and quickly grew.
Boom.
A powerful force suddenly gushed out from his right arm and poured into the yellow long sword in his hand. The yellow sword in his hand gave off countless vein-like light patterns, and its power increased greatly. Nangong Saishu's breathing stopped again. She did not have time to pull her sword back. An even more muffled sound occurred in front of her. Her feet left the ground once again, and a strong tremor passed from the sword hilt to her arm. Her sleeves were completely shattered, and the pieces of cloth flew out of her hands like butterflies. The powerful force sent her flying in an instant, and she fell even further away. Xie Chongsheng and the others on the viewing platform were shocked. Many people opened their mouths, but no one spoke. Was this the power of the Green Vine Sword Academy's strongest, thriving withering art? Ding Ning was eating roasted meat. When the first muffled sound reached his ears, he stopped and listened more attentively. When the second, even more oppressive sound was heard, he felt the ground tremble slightly. He frowned and stood up. Chapter 70. He had a goal that the young geniuses of Chongling could not even imagine and cultivation experience that they could not understand. So, just from the feeling of power from the first muffled sound, he was certain that one of them was He Xiaoxi, who had the most outstanding physical strength. As to the other person, it had to be one of Zhang Yi, Su Qin, or Nangong Kaishu. When two tigers fought, one would be wounded. This was also a rare opportunity for him. So, he put on his dry clothes as quickly as possible. He did not even bother to eat the remaining meat and sprinted in the direction of the sound. At this time, everyone on the viewing platform was attracted by the battle between He Xiaoxi and Nangong Kaishu. Yet, some people still noticed Ding Ning's unusual movements. For example, Xiero.
She found it hard to understand.
In her opinion, at this time, Ding Ning, who was very weak compared to these experts, should be hiding and staying away from the battle. Why did he rush over at such a fast speed? The battle between Nangong Kaishu and He Xiaoxi had not finished. In the spreading dust, Nangong Kaishu struggled to stand up, her arms trembling. Her palms were covered in wounds. Every corner of her robe turned red and started to drip blood. She looked at He Xiaoxi in the mist in front of her. She knew that she could not win against He Xiaoxi in terms of physical strength and vital energy cultivation method.
But she still wanted to try.
Even cultivators of vital energy realm could not become a small pond that gathered primal energies of the universe in the Sword Trial Valley and could not replenish their vital energy. If both sides ran out of vital energy, then the only thing that would decide victory was pure physical strength, sword skills, and true battle experience. She wanted to see if her sword skills and true battle experience were as strong as He Xiaoxi's. So she spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with mud. She looked at He Xiaoxi and said, "You should not have much vital energy left. In the next attack, let everyone use up their vital energy." He Xiaoxi's eyebrows rose slightly. Nangong Saishu's strength did not exceed his expectations, but her willpower and determination to win had completely exceeded his expectations. Of course, he wasn't afraid of such a challenge. He took a deep breath and remained silent. Once again, he raised his sword and nodded. However, unlike the previous 2 times, he began to take the initiative to charge forward. The thriving withering art he cultivated didn't just have the mysteries of power conversion between withering and thriving. The vital energy stored in his energy sea was slightly more than ordinary cultivation methods. Adding on his powerful physical strength, even without using vital energy, he could defeat most Realm 2 cultivators. Therefore, he was confident he could harvest on the first day. But because there were people like Zhang Yi and Su Qin, he wanted to leave some vital energy. At this moment, he wanted to rely on his physical strength to face Nangong Saishu's challenge. His explosive power was astonishing. The place where his feet landed was full of craters. He had only sprinted for a distance of over 30 meters, but a terrifying gust of wind had already appeared in front of him. Large amounts of fallen leaves were swept up by the wind brought about by his body, forming a moving wall of fallen leaves. The withered yellow sword in his hand slashed forward. It seemed to be calm, but there was a sense of heat spreading from the tip of the sword. A line of fire landed on the wall of dancing fallen leaves in front of him. There was a loud boom. The fire borrowed from the wind, and the dancing fallen leaves started to burn fiercely. Under the compression of his sword energy, countless burning leaves were compressed into a very small space. When the hot air collided, an even greater pressure was generated, and an even greater power suddenly burst forth. Many Green Vine Sword Academy disciples understood where this sword came from. Fire from withered wood. This was one of the moves in the Withered Wood Sword Manual of the Green Vine Sword Academy. The Withered Wood Sword Manual was one of the most profound sword manuals in the Green Vine Sword Academy. He Zhaoxi's vital energy method was the best in the Green Vine Sword Academy, and his sword manual was also the most profound in the Green Vine Sword Academy. On the viewing platform, Ku Shichuan frowned slightly. He Zhaoxi's performance caused him to feel a faint threat. Seeing the ball of fire suddenly form in front of her, Nangong Kaishu hesitated slightly. But in the next moment, her gaze became determined. She ignored the pain of her broken flesh rubbing against the sword hilt and gripped the sword hilt even tighter. She channeled all the true essence in her body into her 2 swords. The fish-patterned sword slashed out of her right hand at an unusually straight angle, facing the withered yellow sword that was about to explode. Waves of energy continued to erupt from the sword. It was just one sword, but it was like countless waves were crashing like countless swords. This was what she was most skilled in, the city-connecting sword formula that pursued pure ferocity. There was a loud boom. The burning withered leaves turned into tiny embers. The compressed ball of fire finally exploded at this moment. The straight fish-patterned sword suddenly stopped amidst the countless sparks. As the withered yellow long sword slashed down on its body, the iron sword bent once again. It could no longer stay in its master's hand and flew diagonally upwards. After sending Nangong Saishu's fish-patterned sword flying, He Zhaoxi's heart sank. A howl came out of Nangong Saishu's mouth. He sensed a powerful force pressing down on his sword again. This was Nangong Saishu's other small sword. But this sword also had the same ferocious city-connecting sword move. He shook his head helplessly. He channeled the remaining vital energy in his body into the sword in his hand. A great force hit the sword in his left hand. Nangong Kaishu, who had been prepared, jumped up. At the same time, her fingers relaxed slightly, raised back, and clenched again. Beads of blood sprayed out between the sword hilt and her hand. She still gripped the sword in her hand. But at this time, she saw He Zhaoxi raise his head. His entire body was also shaking, but his knees were slightly bent, and his body didn't even take a single step back. The yellow sword in his hand paused for a moment in the air, and then slashed at her like lightning. Nangong Kaishu forced her sword down. There was a loud bang. Her sword still did not leave her hand, but the withered yellow sword light lowered and pressed down, cutting past her waist. Blood gushed out from her waist, and half of her robes were soaked. Nangong Kaishu gave a sorrowful cry and flipped backwards. Her sorrowful cry was not due to pain, but due to strong unwillingness and helplessness. She had successfully forced He Xiaoxi to use the last bit of vital energy he had wanted to save. But she was still a thread short. That last thread of power caused her to be slower than He Xiaoxi and unable to seal his sword move. The sword wound at her waist was not serious and not deep. But if she continued to fight, she could not treat the wound. The large amount of blood loss would cause her to lose all ability to fight, and she would quickly fall unconscious. He Xiaoxi prepared to move again. Out of respect for Nangong Kaishu, he was not prepared to let her fight again. But at this time, a heavily panting voice sounded. When we came in, I told you to run if you could not win. You had to fight so hard. On the viewing platform, Xie Chongqing's gaze followed Nangong Caishu's body. Seeing more blood flow out of Nangong Caishu's body, his expression grew more nervous. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that there was another person near Nangong Kaishu and He Xiaoxi. When he saw the person's figure, he immediately screamed with an ugly expression. "Ding Ning, why are you here?" At this time, Nangong Kaishu judged who the newcomer was from the voice. Her expression was pleasantly surprised at first, but then turned to anger. Her shout sounded at almost the same time as Xie Chongqing. "Ding Ning, you also came to this area? What are you doing here? What is Ding Ning doing here? Does he want to take advantage?" Many people on the grandstand had just seen Ding Ning's arrival, and this thought came to their minds at the same time. "I'm here to take advantage of the situation," Ding Ning said as soon as this thought appeared in their minds. He looked at Nangong Kaishu and He Xiaoxi with a matter-of-fact expression. One is out of vital energy, the other is seriously injured. Is this not the best time to take advantage? Nangong Kaishu wanted to say something in anger, but Ding Ning looked calmly at her and said, "If you do not stop the bleeding, I fear that even the teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy will come to stop your trial. I will not be able to take advantage." Nangong Kaishu was stunned. She still could not understand Ding Ning's actions. But she gritted her teeth and started to quickly stop the bleeding. No matter what happened next, if she did not stop the bleeding, the teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy would immediately come to stop her trial. "You want to help her?" He Xiaoxi, who had been silent since Ding Ning appeared, saw something and looked at Ding Ning. Ding Ning shook his head. "This rule is not allowed." He Xiaoxi ignored his words and looked seriously at his eyes and the remnant sword at his waist. He said softly, "I am very happy that she has a friend like you, but you are too weak." Hearing the two's conversation, Nangong Kaishu shouted angrily, "Ding Ning, I do not need you to care about me.
Run.
Shut up and save your energy. Otherwise, I will be the first to take care of you." Ding Ning glanced at her and then turned to look at He Xiaoxi. "How do you know you cannot win if you have not fought?" He said calmly. Nangong Caishu's expression was ugly, and she wanted to attack Ding Ning. But Ding Ning's words and tone caused her to pause. "Also, I am already here. With my speed and stamina, I cannot escape even if I want to." But Ding Ning's next words caused her vision to darken, and she almost had the impulse to curse. Chapter 71. He Xiaoxi did not speak. Regardless of the opponent's strength and cultivation, some opponents were worthy of respect. He held his sword across his chest again and said solemnly to Ding Ning, "Please." Ding Ning also raised the last flower remnant sword and said with a smile, "Please." He Xiaoxi looked at Ding Ning, who did not want to attack first, and then at Ding Ning's short remnant sword. He could not help but frown. But in the next moment, he just nodded and said, "All right." As soon as the word left his lips, he began to move. He flew straight at Ding Ning. His body was like a heavy stone thrown from a catapult, crushing the space in front of him with a loud bang. At the same time, he once again brought out a terrifying gale. The withered yellow leaves once again danced in front of him. He followed behind this wall that was flying towards Ding Ning and swung his sword. His vital energy had been used up. When he swung his sword, there were no more lines of fire on the blade. But as he exerted force, due to his terrifying speed, his sword still gave off terrifying power. The straight blade in his hand was quickly bent into an arc by this power. The moment it straightened again, there was an explosion. The power transmitted from the blade hit the withered leaves in front of him. The fluttering withered leaves suddenly became heavy. In the next moment, they hissed and shot towards Ding Ning like arrows. He Xiaoxi took a deep breath. His movements suddenly became gentle. His long sword went from slapping to stabbing as he hid the tip of the sword among the flying withered leaves. Seeing the withered leaves form a wall that was slapped into flying arrows, and then He Xiaoxi's long sword hidden among them, many students on the viewing platform had complicated emotions. They thought that they might not be able to withstand He Xiaoxi's attack. Ding Ning continued to retreat. The remnant sword in his hand was at his eyebrows, protecting his eyes. He did not care about the countless falling leaves flying towards him. He allowed the leaves to hit his body and even cut his face, leaving bloody marks on his face. But when the tip of the sword was about to reach his left shoulder, he slashed down with his sword. There was an explosion. The gentle yellow longsword was blocked by his sword, and countless sparks flew out from the place where the two swords met. Many people on the viewing platform had bright eyes. They had not expected Ding Ning to be able to block this sword so accurately amidst so many obscuring flying leaves. He Xiaoxi's breathing paused slightly. Feeling the impact from his own sword, he frowned slightly. Without any hesitation, his body seemed to be about to fall forward as he exerted his strength once again, pressing all of his body weight forward. At this time, his yellow longsword and Ding Ning's remnant sword were only half an inch apart, so he did not stop and could not dodge. The two swords met again and gave off another explosion. Ding Ning gave a muffled grunt. He was obviously unable to withstand this kind of power. His entire right arm swayed violently, and his entire body was pushed back as if he had been hit by a galloping horse. In an instant he had retreated 5 or 6 steps. He Xiaoxi took a step. With just one step, he charged out of the distance Ding Ning had retreated 5 or 6 steps. His hand was still unusually steady as he swung the yellow longsword forward again. When he slashed, the blade cut through the air, causing the sword to move quickly in the air. But when it approached Ding Ning's body, the sword turned sideways and the blade once again curved in the air as he exerted force. With a snap, He Xiaoxi swung his sword horizontally like he was swinging a hammer towards Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's inky green remnant sword was covered in fine white flowers. He frowned and kept on sending out physical energy to block in front of him. The ear-piercing sound of metal rang out again. His sword still accurately blocked He Xiaoxi's sword, but the great power caused his remnant sword to bounce back and hit his chest. Ding Ning, who had been flying backwards, seemed to have been hit by a large rock. His feet left the ground and he flew backwards in a miserable posture in everyone's eyes. The moment his feet landed on the ground again, a thread of blood seeped out of his lips and dripped down his pale skin. There is no such thing as a free win in this world. Seeing this scene, Xie Changshen could not help but shout angrily from the viewing platform. He Xiaoxi was not an ordinary student. He clearly possessed superior techniques and rich combat experience. No matter how good Ding Ning's understanding of the Wildfire Sword Manual was, it would not be of any use against his overwhelming power. He Xiaoxi could easily attack, while Ding Ning's body was still recovering from the shock. Ding Ning would not have time to react and use an exquisite sword move. Xie Changshen could imagine that Ding Ning's wrist would be in pain like it was being broken with each block of He Xiaoxi's sword. His entire arm would be numb and sore, and would not be able to recover quickly. There is no such thing as a free win in this world. As Xie Changshen spoke, in a Chongling alley, a middle-aged man was sitting on a bench in a street noodle shop. He was drinking noodle soup as he spoke disdainfully to a young person next to him. This middle-aged man with a straight face and slightly red skin had a thick yellow bamboo pole used by porters next to him. His clothing was that of an ordinary porter, and even his straw sandals were covered in dirt and worn out. But his true identity was Qin Xian, a wanted criminal of the Divinity Bureau. In the Divinity Bureau, his status was slightly lower than Mo Qinggong and the other evil dogs, but his experience was similar to Mo Qinggong and the others. So in the Divinity Bureau, he could make most people look at him, and not the majority. The young person next to him, Meng Tianfang, was a fresh meat who had just been transferred to the Divinity Bureau. He came from a decent sect in Chongling, but after entering the Divinity Bureau, he had to obediently call him master and listen to his orders and teachings. Young people who could enter the Divinity Bureau, other than those who had special backers, were truly hardworking, careful, and observant young geniuses. Hearing Qin Xian's words, Meng Tianfang understood. The alley in front of them was called Lion Alley. In Chongling, this was an unusually busy and prosperous place. One end of the alley was the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall, and the other end was the Shandong Commandery Meeting Hall. Between them were shops that sold antiques and paintings. The Qin dynasty had 43 commanderies and was unprecedentedly vast. Chongling was unprecedentedly large and magnificent. When people from the outer commanderies came to Chongling to do business, they often did not know the way. They were not familiar with the place and people, and were often bullied by the locals. So, with the lead of some businesses, they set up many meeting halls. These meeting halls were not just places to stay, but also places where people from the outer commanderies could find people to do business in Chongling and find opportunities to make friends. So usually, there was an endless stream of carriages, and it was very busy. Ever since the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, the Qin dynasty had not been at war for more than a decade. Everyone had enough to eat and wear. Some of the noble families had to pay attention to their daily food and utensils. The prices of paintings, antiques, furnishings, and toys all rose. The reason Qin Xian said this was because a merchant from another commandery had spent 100 taels of silver to buy a jade rui from the Yu dynasty right under his nose. If it really was a jade rui left behind by the Yu dynasty, it would be worth at least 1,000 taels of silver. The merchants in Chongling had done business for so many years and would not sell it cheaply. But looking at the joyful appearance of the merchant from the outer commandery, he clearly was not buying a fake to sell. He clearly thought that he had good eyes and had picked up a great bargain at a low price. But even though Qin Xian did not know much about antiques, he was certain that such a thing could not happen. He had been blinded by greed. Qin Xian drank all of the broth and looked disdainfully at the merchant from the outer commandery, who was still celebrating. Suddenly, his expression changed. The young Divinity Bureau official next to him detected something wrong. He grew nervous and asked softly, "Master, what is it?" "The Chongling guards." Qin Xian looked strangely at the other end of the street. He seemed to be answering the other's question, but also seemed to be talking to himself. Why would the Chongling guards come here? The young Divinity Bureau official, Meng Tianfang, stilled. He followed Qin Xian's gaze and saw dozens of Chongling guards in chainmail passing through another street and heading towards a caravan. That caravan had just left the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall. Meng Tianfang's expression immediately grew strange. Those Chongling guards gave them the feeling that they were going to investigate the caravan. But Chongling's investigations relied on the Astrology Bureau and the Divinity Bureau. If there was a need to seal or set up checkpoints, they relied on the Tiger Wolf army stationed in Chongling. While the Chongling guards belonged to the warden's office like the Tiger Wolf army, their usual duties were limited to guarding and patrolling certain fixed places. For example, the offices of some bureaus, the security around some marquee establishments, the residences of officials, the outer perimeter of the imperial palace, the tombs of past emperors, and so on. Of course, they could check on people they found suspicious at any time. They would act against criminals. But on the chessboard of Chongling, the Chongling guards were relatively dead pieces. Just like how dogs could go and catch mice at home, but cats would be responsible for catching mice. It would appear strange if the watchdog ran to other places to catch mice. Even more importantly, Meng Tianfang and Qin Xian were watching here because they knew that there was likely a cultivator who could be described as a great rebel hiding in the Zhejiang Commandery Meeting Hall. Chapter 72. For the present Qin dynasty, there were not many cultivators who could be described as great rebels. Not only did these people have astonishing cultivations and could cause great damage to a stable dynasty, but they also came from illustrious backgrounds. Most of them were flag-bearers of dynasties that had already fallen. Dozens of days ago, the Divinity Bureau had found this cultivator who might be a great rebel through some clues. However, they had only been observing in secret because they wanted to obtain more clues from this cultivator and find the leader behind this person, the person that even the Emperor was wary of. The inexplicable appearance of these Chongling guards was not a good thing for these two Divinity Bureau officials before the matter had made any decisive progress. Qin Xian and Meng Tianfang exchanged a look. Qin Xian gritted his teeth and immediately made a decision. He said to Meng Tianfang, "Hurry and report to official Qi to prevent any changes." Meng Tianfang's eyes flashed. He did not say anything, but pretended to be afraid of the Chongling guards. He quickly turned into a side alley and left. At this time, the group of Chongling guards in chainmail charged forward like tigers into a pack of wolves and stopped the caravan that had just left the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall. The leader, a general wearing a black metal mask, shouted viciously, "Stop the carriage.
Get down.
Prepare the household registration documents." A thin middle-aged man dressed in blue robes bowed and said politely, "What matter does this general have? Is there a misunderstanding? We are Zhejiang Commandery's Tian Shengcheng business." However, before he could finish speaking, with a boom, his body was already kicked out by that general, smashing fiercely into the carriage behind him. For a moment, the lean middle-aged man in green who looked like an advisor turned ghastly pale. He couldn't breathe and almost fainted. "Did you not hear what I said? Household registration documents and travel permits." The general who had kicked back the blue-robed advisor held his sword hilt. The metal mask on his face reflected the sunlight as he said coldly, "We suspect that someone in your caravan is related to tomb robbers. Everyone get off the carriage and show your household registration documents. If you resist, kill them on the spot." The people in the caravan who had been angry and wanted to curse immediately paled. Even the people who had been driven out of the Zhejiang Commandery meeting hall froze where they stood. Stealing from the royal tombs was a serious crime that could result in 9 familial exterminations. If there really was such a person among them, then anyone who dared to speak up for the caravan would suffer and be imprisoned. At this time, Qin Xian, who was still sitting on the long bench facing the street, felt cold again. He found that not far behind these dozens of vicious Chongling guards, there was an expressionless Chongling guard general standing in the shadows under the eaves of a shop. That Chongling guard general was extremely low-key and could not compare to the general wearing the metal mask in terms of presence. Yet Qin Xian could clearly see that his hair was held up by a white jade hairpin, and the scabbard at his waist was inlaid with multiple red agate beads. This meant that this Chongling guard general standing silently in the shadows was a commandant. This kind of official position that required one to kill 1,000 armored soldiers, he was at least a Realm 5 or even Realm 6 cultivator. Thinking of this, Qin Xian looked at the general wearing the metal mask. The more he looked, the more terrifying he felt. He did not feel that this was an ordinary centurion, leading hundreds of soldiers. His body grew colder. Even the heat from drinking a bowl of hot noodle soup was suppressed. He could not help but stand up. At this time, the caravan that had been stopped by the dozens of armored Chongling guards had all disembarked from their carriages. Each person held a household registration document. In the previous dynasties, even the Qin dynasty before the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, the inspection was done through travel documents. The documents would contain simple information about one's birth, where they came from, where they were going, and what they were doing. Along the way, the commanderies and counties would stamp the documents to prove that this person had passed through these places. But when the Yuanwu emperor ascended the throne, the Qin dynasty implemented new policies and changed many laws. In those years, there was a storm of blood and countless people died. But in the end, some of the new policies were firmly carried out. The most effective of these was the registration system. Every citizen of the Qin dynasty, when they were born, would be registered by the commanderies and counties. If there were changes, they had to be changed at any time. If they died, their records would be erased. If they were rewarded with land, it would be taken back. The greatest effect of this system was not to make it easier to confirm a person's true identity and prevent refugees and bandits from moving freely in the Qin dynasty, but in the implementation of taxes and rewards. Just by taking back some empty heads and rewards, the Qin dynasty's treasury was filled in a few years. It forced the enemy dynasties that had been eyeing the Qin dynasty to form an alliance with the Qin dynasty. You are called Zhou Qin? Where are you from? What do you usually do? The Chongling guard started to inspect the household registration documents of the people in the caravan and asked some questions to verify. Qin Xian had picked up the yellow bamboo pole on the chair next to him. After taking one step, his breathing stopped completely. The general with the Dyson iron mask was walking towards a person in the caravan. This was a man dressed as a carriage driver. He looked to be in his 30s, and his hair was slightly yellow. Although his face was very different from the person the Divinity Bureau had been staring at, his body shape was very similar. Most importantly, with Qin Xian's many years of experience, he could tell that there was something wrong with this coachman's behavior. While he was being interrogated by a Chongling guard and answering questions, his gaze was inexplicably flashing. He had a thoughtful expression and did not have the terror of the others. This gave Qin Xian the feeling that this person was thinking about how to deal with the problem of his identity being exposed. The general with the Dyson black iron mask obviously noticed this person's difference, which was why he walked towards him. What made Qin Xian breathless was that the corner of the man's mouth was slightly raised, as if a strange sneer had appeared. But Qin Xian did not have time to stop anything. Even if he showed his identity and charged over, he would alert the enemy. So he gripped the yellow bamboo pole in his hand tightly and hoped that the reinforcements from the Divinity Bureau would come quickly. I see that you have a great problem. What is your name? The general with the cold iron mask had walked in front of the man who looked like a carriage driver and asked coldly. The person who looked like a carriage driver reached out his left hand to rub his face, pausing on his stubbled chin for a breath of time. He seemed to have finally thought it through and made his decision. He smiled inexplicably and looked at this general with a provocative gaze. You really want to know? A dangerous aura suddenly filled the entire long alley. Even the other Chongling guards who were investigating felt something was wrong. They turned to look in the direction of the carriage driver. The general in the shadows under the eaves, whose face could not be seen clearly, also suddenly raised his head, his eyes shining like stars. The general with the cold iron mask paused slightly and sneered. It seems that it is you. I want to see what kind of name can scare me in Chongling. The person who looked like a carriage driver smiled, showing his white teeth. You will know when you see my sword. The moment he said this, the air around him suddenly shook. Smoke and dust rushed out from the cracks in the ground under his feet. The clear streets seemed to have suddenly become foggy. At the same time, the numerous carriages around him seemed to become weightless pieces of paper and flew outwards. The general with the cold iron mask pulled out his sword in shock. The scene in this moment was as still as a painting. His sword was halfway out of its sheath. The carriages had just flown silently, the wheels had just left the ground, and the person who looked like a carriage driver had finished waving his hand forward. There seemed to be a stream of water in the air that swept across the general's body from top to bottom. A thread of light suddenly appeared in the middle of the cold mask on the general's face, and then split open. There was a shocked face under the mask, and then a red line appeared in the middle of this face. Cloud water. When the person who looked like a carriage driver attacked, the general had already pulled out his sword and shouted in shock. Yet, when countless beads of blood flew out of the red line, he only managed to shout 2 words.
Boom.
In the next moment, the carriages that seemed to have stopped in the air crashed into the shops on the sides. At the same time, the general's body split in half from the middle. Blood sprayed into the cold air. At this time, the surrounding Chongling guards finally saw that this person, who looked like a carriage driver, was holding a sword that seemed to be made from spring water. The great rebel of the Wei Cloud Water Palace. An incredulous howl rang out. This shout was made with vital energy. The sound seemed to penetrate metal and split stone, and spread far away in an instant. There was a ripping sound. The one who let out this howl was the general who had originally been hiding in the shadows. A small peach-red sword flew in front of him. As it flew rapidly, layers upon layers of the sword bloomed, as if it wanted to fill the space around this man who looked like a coachman. But facing such a sword, the man who looked like a carriage driver put away his sword with one hand, put his hands behind his back, and smiled proudly. A window in the Jeojong Commandery meeting hall next to him silently disappeared, crushed to powder by a vast primal energies of the universe. A glowing drop of water floated down. Just one drop, but it shattered all the peach blossoms. The peach-red sword broke. The commander of the Chongling Guards collapsed to the ground. His body seemed to shrink several inches, and a mouthful of blood surged out of his mouth. Qin Xian looked up in disbelief at the Jeojong Commandery meeting hall. "We like to learn the sword and spend 10 years in the cold pool." With a soft sound, a white figure floated down from the Jeojong Commandery meeting hall. All the colors in the sky seemed to be covered by this person. Everyone in the streets looked up. Slaying the serpent in 1 day, blue water crimson for 3 months, this person was still singing slowly. With a boom, more than a dozen armored Chongling guards were sent flying in all directions and fell into the eaves on the sides. Chapter 73. The art is forged into a sword, but thousands of chariots cannot stop it. Escape and change your name. Eat the wind and dew in the mountains. The white figure immediately moved dozens of feet along the streets. As he sang, a sword light danced around him like water. The Chongling guards along the way did not even have the power to fight back. They were sent flying upon contact and fell into the eaves on the sides. Hearing the song and seeing the invincible sword light, Qin Xian could not help but tremble. He did not even have the courage to pull out the long sword from the yellow bamboo tube. He could only shout in his heart, "Bai Shan Shui." It really is Bai Shan Shui. The man who looked like a carriage driver casually grabbed an empty carriage. He held a sword in one hand and drove the carriage with the other. He followed behind the white figure. In a few breaths, he passed by Qin Xian and passed through the long alley. The rumbling of war chariots could be heard not far away. Dozens of Tiger Wolf Army SEAL chariots charged out of the flat streets and surrounded the carriage that was charging towards the outskirts of Chongling. The country is destroyed. The mountains and rivers are mourned. The subjects are responsible. While we are lowly, we will not hesitate. Today we will fight Chongling, and in the future, we will kill the king of Qin and sacrifice the soul of our country. However, the rebellious song that carried an indescribable arrogance continued to sound. Like countless ferocious beasts, the formation chariots were not a match for it. The heavy chariots flew out from the sides like rice that had been thrown up by farmers and smashed into the houses on the sides. The thunderous sound of the landing continued to reverberate, and long smoke rose from all directions. The white figure surrounded by the flowing sword light seemed to enter uninhabited land. Like a prehistoric beast passing through Chongling, he charged towards the shores of the Wei River. More troops had not arrived yet. A dozen Divinity Bureau officials had just arrived at the Jeojong Commandery meeting hall. Among them, the Vice Bureau Chief of the Divinity Bureau, Qi Beihuai, saw the Chongling Guard Commandant sitting dispiritedly on the ground. Then he saw the pillars of smoke that shot into the sky like dragons. Hearing the shouts and shouts in the streets and alleys and the unstoppable song, he immediately realized what had happened. His face paled. He shouted almost hysterically, "Why is the Chongling Guard here? Why is the Chongling Guard here?" The Chongling Guard Commandant sitting on the ground heard Qi Beihuai's roar. He struggled to lift his head, blood dripping down his lips. However, he did not answer Qi Beihuai's question. Instead, he repeated softly like a puppet, "Bai Shan Shui, why is Bai Shan Shui here?" In the alleys of Chongling, as Bai Shan Shui was carving out a path to the Wei River, He Xiaoxi and Ding Ning were still fighting in the Sword Trial Valley. Ding Ning slowly stood up from the dried leaves on the ground. Blood dripped from his lips, but he still slowly raised the last flower remnant sword. Still not admitting defeat, Do you have to injure yourself to the point where you won't be able to cultivate for the next 1 or 2 months before you give up? Xie Chongsheng shouted angrily. Why are you still holding up your sword? Don't tell me you want to rely on this broken sword to fight your way out? Across from Ding Ning, He Zhaoxi had the same thought. He looked at Ding Ning and couldn't help but say softly, You still want to fight? At the side, Nangong Kaishu could no longer control her emotions. She wanted to stop Ding Ning from fighting. Yet, Ding Ning seemed to sense her emotions. He first turned to look at her and shook his head. Then he looked at He Zhaoxi. I am familiar with your sword moves, so I only need to take this next blow. One blow to decide victory? Did he still have the confidence to win? He Zhaoxi's brow unconsciously furrowed. However, he felt that Ding Ning did not seem to be lying. So, he prepared to use the safest method to deal with Ding Ning's blow. It is important for people to know their own limits. If you do not know your own limits, you will lose very badly, Ku Shichuan said coolly. He was very pleased. Especially when even Xie Chongsheng and the others who had been at odds with him could not help but scold Ding Ning. He felt even more pleased. No one responded to him because Ding Ning had started to move again. At the edge of the viewing platform, Shui Wangxiu, who was sitting on a rattan chair with narrowed eyes, murmured softly to himself. What are you selling? As he muttered, he put his hands on his knees. Because of He Zhaoxi and Ding Ning's stances, he inexplicably felt that something was about to happen. His white beard was already sparse. If he bent it too much, he would look too ugly. He Zhaoxi's expression turned solemn as he started to move. His body once again faced Ding Ning in a straight line. The yellow longsword in his hand swung quickly and then turned horizontally to form an arc in the air. This was the purest method of suppressing with power. The area the sword swept covered every possible direction Ding Ning could dodge and forced Ding Ning to block the sword. This was the safest method of fighting, forcing the battle to be extremely simple. When this sword came out, most people on the viewing platform thought that Ding Ning could not block the sword. In the previous exchanges, Ding Ning had been sent flying by this simple but exceptionally effective slap. He had been unable to fight back. Ding Ning was still forced to use his sword to block like before. Yet, to everyone's surprise, this time was different. As he swung the remnant sword in his right hand, and countless small white flowers bloomed in the air, his left hand crushed a piece of wax. A yellow pill the size of a longan flew into his mouth, and he swallowed it. He Zhaoxi was the first to have a strange feeling. This moment was too fast. This strange feeling did not come from the pill, but from Ding Ning's sword. Ding Ning's sword seemed to be no different from the previous times. Yet, Ding Ning's body seemed to have forced itself forward and seemed to be about to collide with his long sword. He did not have time to think.
Dang.
An explosive sound rang out. A wave of shock rose in his heart. Ding Ning's sword was almost at the tip of his sword. In the previous exchanges, Ding Ning's sword had hit the middle of his long sword. But this time, Ding Ning had charged forward and hit the tip of his sword. This change caused him to feel that he could not exert any power. He also felt that he was not holding a sword, but a lever. Ding Ning's figure seemed to be pried up by his power. He flashed up and got closer to him.
Boom.
At this time, he seemed to hear a wild medicinal power spread through Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning gave a muffled grunt. His body clearly exploded with more power. The remnant sword in his hand gave off more white flowers and cut towards He Zhaoxi's waist. He Zhaoxi's pupils contracted violently, and his breathing stopped completely. He pulled back his sword. Yet his sword was very long. In this close proximity, his long sword was not as nimble as Ding Ning's short sword. In this moment, he only had time to use his sword hilt to knock Ding Ning's blade. The incomparably fierce slash suddenly turned into a clump of scattered dark green weeds. The tip of the sword spun in the air, creating a patch of sword shadows that cut towards He Zhaoxi's fingers. He Zhaoxi's mind was filled with disbelief. Yet, he had no choice. He released his fingers and dodged to the side. The withered yellow longsword suddenly lost its master's grip and fell in the air. Ding Ning's dark green remnant sword flicked upwards. This withered yellow flying sword sped up and flew towards the vine forest behind him. Hijashi looked at the withered yellow longsword that landed in the distant forest, and then at the inky green remnant sword blooming with white flowers. Hijashi paused. His eyes flashed with even more shock. Pill's sword paths. A wave of yellow medicinal energy was still roiling under Ding Ning's skin. Holding the remnant sword, Ding Ning's clothes were ragged, but he looked stronger and more powerful than ever before. Ding Ning saw that Hijashi did not want to fight, so he did not pursue. He nodded at Hijashi and said softly, "Nangong Kaishu gave me this pill before the trial. I have not cultivated the pill sword path. I just received a pill from someone and fought with my life to protect her." Ding Ning, you are a friend worth making. You are a true genius. Hijashi's eyes were filled with bitterness and unwillingness, but true respect appeared on his face. He bowed slightly to Ding Ning and said, "I have lost. You ate that yellow quart gold pill at this time?" Nangong Tsaishu's shocked voice sounded. The change in this moment was so fast and precise that even she only reacted now. What is going on? Ding Ning ate a pill? Hijashi lost? After she spoke in shock, the viewing platform was in an uproar. The loudest exclamations since the start of the sword trial festival sounded. Duanmu Lien froze. Di Qingmei's face was ashen. Ku Shichuan's disdain froze on his face for a long time. What pill is this that is so powerful? Shui Wangshu did not tear off his beard, but his hands almost tore apart his robes. The expression in his eyes was complicated. Ding Ning had given him a great surprise. Other than the fact that when the pill entered his mouth, he was like a swordsman who cultivated the pill path. Even his sword moves had completely defeated Hijashi. Ding Ning had appeared to be fighting hard, but he had been grasping Hijashi's sword moves and thinking carefully about how to defeat them. If people had doubted Ding Ning's talent before, starting from this battle, everyone would realize that Ding Ning possessed astounding talent in many areas. But the greater one's talent, the more they could not be squandered. He was very worried that this powerful pill of unknown origin would bring unfavorable consequences to Ding Ning. Xia Chongqing gaped again, unable to speak for a long time. How admirable! It wasn't until Su Heshan, who was beside him, said such a sentence that he completely came back to his senses. Thank you. Xia Chongqing felt slightly ashamed, but he also thanked Ku Shichuan seriously. Ku Shichuan looked in shock at him, not knowing why he was thanking him. Every time you openly talk about how he can't do it, he will have a surprising performance, so I thank you. Xia Chongqing looked at him and explained, so you can talk more about how he can't do it. Ku Shichuan's expression suddenly turned ashen. Do not mess around. Childish. Xia Rou shouted sternly. She looked as if she wanted to slap Xia Chongqing, but at this moment, there was an indescribable joy flowing between her brows. It is not time to be happy. But at this time, Su Heshan's grave voice sounded. Su Qin. Xia Chongqing suddenly turned his head, and his expression changed dramatically. Chapter 74. There was no time to rejoice. Or rather, Ding Ning himself did not feel much joy because his eyes were calm. He seemed to sense something and looked towards the forest behind Hijashi. The pale green mist, which had calmed down, suddenly began to twist and turn. Su Qin's tall and handsome figure slowly emerged from the mist. Spectacular, truly spectacular. He smiled as he looked at Nangong Kaishu and Hijashi, who had ugly expressions. He clapped his hands and praised. This battle was spectacular, but the most spectacular is the result. No one would have thought that the strongest of Green Vine Sword Academy, Hijashi, would lose to a junior sect brother of White Goat Cave who had just entered the sect. Hijashi turned around and looked straight at Su Qin. He said, "If I had known this, I would have fought you first." Such a pity. Su Qin smiled unconcernedly and said, "I also feel some regret. I had thought that the one fighting you here would be Zhang Yi. This way, I could take care of the last threat in one go." When she saw his gaze when he walked out, Nangong Kaishu knew that Su Qin did not have good intentions towards Ding Ning. Hearing Su Qin's words, she could not help but say coldly, "Is it the conduct of a gentleman to try to take advantage of another's weakness?" Su Qin glanced at her and said coolly, "A gentleman is good at making use of material things. Those who are good at fighting will use the situation to their advantage. To attack when the enemy is at their peak is a brute." "I know I have not studied as much as you," Nangong Kaishu said angrily. "But this is not a battle between cultivators of enemy countries, but a trial between members of the same sect. Since we are not on the same page, there is no need to waste words," Ding Ning said calmly. Su Qin had wanted to argue with Nangong Kaishu, but was stopped by Ding Ning's words. He was not angry and smiled slightly. He looked at Ding Ning. "In reality, I admire your personality. But it is a pity that we were on different sides when we entered the sect. So each time we see each other, we dislike each other." Ding Ning also smiled slightly and said, "Senior sect brother is not hypocritical." Su Qin's smile faded. He said, "Using the enemy's vital energy to use the power of pills, you are good at making use of material things. But I do not know if you have the confidence to try my sword now." "What are you saying? Disciples of the same sect should support each other. White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy are one, but even in the same cultivation place, whether in the same year or not, there are differences between those who often cultivate together and those who do not. In a trial like this, you should first deal with the other Green Vine Sword Academy disciples. How can you deal with little sect brother first?" At this time, someone suddenly spoke urgently in the mist nearby. Along with this urgent voice, a figure rushed over in a hurry. Su Qin's gaze suddenly turned cold, so cold it seemed like ice would form in his eyes. The smile on Ding Ning's face did not change. He nodded to the figure rushing over and said, "Eldest senior brother, why are you here?" On the viewing platform, Xie Chongsheng sighed in relief. No matter how he looked at it, Zhang Yi did not look like he wanted to make trouble for Ding Ning. Beside him, Su Heshan also relaxed slightly, but his expression was still serious. While He Zhaoxi, Nangong Kaishu, and Ding Ning had fought for a long time in this place, the formations here were soundproof. The fact that Su Qin and Zhang Yi could come in succession meant that He Zhaoxi's power was astounding, and the commotion was too great. The other White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy students did not come because they felt they could not match and hid further away. Even he felt it was a pity that He Zhaoxi had lost here and could not win in the end. But from another perspective, it showed how difficult it would be for Ding Ning to win against He Zhaoxi. Zhang Yi glanced at Ding Ning's ragged clothes and blood-stained appearance. He was immediately apologetic and said in self-reproach and shock, "I had not expected little sect brother to be a step slower. How come Su Qin's words make it sound like you won?" Ding Ning coughed softly and said, "I came to take advantage. If it was a fair fight outside, it would not be certain." He Zhaoxi frowned when he heard this. He said seriously, "I did not take advantage. You won, I accept my loss." Su Qin's expression grew colder. He looked at Zhang Yi and slowly said, "He Zhaoxi is lost. If we can take care of these two, you and I will be the top two in this sword trial festival. You really want to protect them?" Zhang Yi looked strangely at him and said matter-of-factly, "How can a temporary victory be more important than friendship?" Su Qin sneered. "What if I do not want to listen to you and want to steal their tokens?" Zhang Yi said seriously, "Then I will do my best to stop you." At this time, Ding Ning suddenly interrupted. "Eldest sect brother, who is stronger between you and this second sect brother?" Nangong Kaishu suddenly wanted to laugh. First, she felt that Zhang Yi was very interesting. He was indeed the kind of gentleman who is gentle and not angry, just a little pedantic, just as the legend said. Second, when Ding Ning said second senior brother, he emphasized the words second a little, which made the title second senior brother sound completely wrong. Zhang Yi also heard that this title was not right. His expression was slightly awkward, and he frowned slightly. But his figure moved closer to Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu and blocked them. Su Qin glanced coldly at Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu. Then he turned away and left. "There are still many enemies. I do not want to fight you to the point where both of us are injured." But according to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, we are not allowed to travel together. Zhang Yi, I do not believe you can protect them in the next 2 days. His cold and murderous voice floated out of the blue mist and into the ears of Zhang Yi, Ding Ning, and the others. Junior sect brother, this is venting your personal anger. Listen to senior sect brother's advice. Being arrogant and jealous of talent is a great taboo in cultivation. Zhang Yi said worriedly to Su Qin's back. Su Qin's figure disappeared into the mist, and no response was heard. Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu could not help but exchange a glance. Eldest senior brother, do you mean what you say? Ding Ning asked suspiciously. Zhang Yi turned around and looked strangely at Ding Ning. Of course I am sincere. Little sect brother, why do you ask? It seems that senior sect brother is a gentleman. Ding Ning said with a smile, I am gauging the heart of a gentleman with my own pettiness. I thought that eldest sect brother was purposefully angering him. Zhang Yi was shocked. I truly hope that he can change. Otherwise, his future is uncertain. How can I purposefully anger him? Seeing old from 3. A hint of emotion appeared in Ding Ning's eyes. It is most likely hard to change a person's nature. He Zhaoxi did not want to waste time. Especially if he lost, he would lose some rewards. He had to treasure his time. He looked at the string of tokens at his waist. His gaze flashed slightly, and he started to take off his clothes. His actions stunned Ding Ning and Zhang Yi. What are you doing? Ding Ning looked dazedly at He Zhaoxi, who had taken off his outer robe and was bare-chested. Your robe is too tattered, and you are injured. It will be cold at night in the mountains and difficult to endure. Also, it is not elegant to be more tattered. In any case, I am going out and have a change of clothes outside. He Zhaoxi casually threw his outer robe to Ding Ning. Ding Ning smiled awkwardly. It seemed that he had thought too much. He Zhaoxi did not have any strange habits. But even if you want to give me clothes, you do not have to take them off in front of me. You should at least care that there are girls present. Nangong Saishu's voice sounded. She looked at He Zhaoxi and said with displeasure. He Zhaoxi's expression froze slightly. He softly defended himself. I thought that it would be more convenient for you to turn around than for me to find a place to take off my clothes. Also, I do not want to waste time. Why should I turn around? Nangong Kaishu glanced at him. Because your figure is very good. He Zhaoxi's expression froze and a rare blush appeared on his face. He coughed softly as though he could not think of a reply. With a step, he turned and fled into the vine forest behind him. They say that words can stop 100,000 swords. Miss Saishu's words today have opened my eyes. Zhang Yi's face was also slightly stiff. He could not calm down for a while, but then he also began to walk in the direction he came from. At the same time, he said softly, according to the rules, we can't travel together. So, junior brother, although I may be nearby in the next 2 days, you have to be careful at all times. When Zhang Yi's figure disappeared into the mist, there was a soft sound of breaking air. A still warm, white goat cave robe flew out of the mist and landed towards Nangong Kaishu. Miss Kaishu, it is good that you and little junior sect brother helped each other. Your wounds are more serious than little junior sect brother's. If you do not want to withdraw and persist, I will give you this outer robe to protect you from the cold at night. I hope you do not dislike it. Because of the formation, the indiscernible voice continued to pass over. Nangong Kaishu stilled slightly. As she caught the robe, she was first grateful. Then she thought of how Zhang Yi had quickly taken off his clothes under the cover of the mist and couldn't help but laugh. Ding Ning's lips curled up. He deliberately shouted in the direction Zhang Yi had left. Senior sect brother Zhang Yi, what will you do if you're naked? Many people are watching from the viewing platform. A hasty exclamation rang out, followed by a faintly discernible voice intermittently. I must find someone nearby to fight. Ask for a protective item. Ding Ning thought of the students of the Green Vine Sword Academy suddenly seeing a bare-chested Zhang Yi charge out. He couldn't help but laugh happily. You have to be careful. I should be nearby. The boundaries of traveling together can be large or small. As long as you do not want to withdraw, I think that the teachers of Green Vine Sword School will not force you to withdraw because of this, since he Xiaoxi has already withdrawn. Then his smile gradually disappeared. He nodded at Nangong Kaishu and slowly walked to the side. At the same time, he spoke softly. Nangong Kaishu nodded. She put on Zhang Yi's robe. Because it was too wide, she felt like she was wearing a costume. Even her hands could not be seen from the sleeves. It was slightly funny. Her wound was very painful, but she was still very happy in her heart. She felt that no matter what the outcome of this trial was, she would still be very happy. Chapter 75. Only when Nangong Kaishu laughed happily did the shock on the viewing platform dissipate. No one had thought that he Xiaoxi, the strongest of the Green Vine Sword Academy, would be defeated on this day, and the one to defeat him was Ding Ning. But for the people of Chongling, the shock today was fated to be even stronger. The tall turrets and the exceptionally straight streets of Chongling showed their usefulness today. The orders from the tall turrets and the enormous crossbows accurately pointed out the path of the galloping carriage. Many soldiers and chariots ran along the straight streets as fast as they could and blocked the path of the carriage ahead of time. But the carriage was only fast, moving in a straight line towards a section of the Wei River at its fastest speed. Before the formation chariots and the heavy armored soldiers had reached a certain scale, there was nothing that could stop the carriage. There was nothing that could stop the white figure that was surrounded by sparkling and translucent streams of water. The heavy sealed chariots were pushed aside by the enormous waves and smashed into the houses and shops on the sides. The fearless, heavily armored soldiers were harvested like rice in autumn. The Chongling people in the distance did not know what was happening. They only saw the dust on both sides of the carriage's path. It was like a serpent had entered Chongling from the Wei River and was rushing back at its fastest speed. On a turret near the huge wave of dust, a general of the Tiger Wolf army looked so gloomy that water was about to drip out. Send the order. The Tiger Wolf army along the way do not fill in. He almost roared out those words. Hearing his military order, a deputy general next to him couldn't help but tremble. He knew that the great cultivators in Chongling would not be able to arrive in time, and the Tiger Wolf army would not be able to get into formation. More reinforcements would only result in more deaths. Yet he also knew that such a great rebel charging out of Chongling was a slap to the faces of all the nobility of the Qin dynasty. Even if they went up, they would not be able to stop this person from charging towards the Wei River. But if he ordered the troops to advance now, he would likely have to bear the anger of the nobility in the future. What are you hesitating for? Seeing that the deputy general beside him hadn't passed down the order, the Tiger Wolf army general roared again with a gloomy face. Today's matter. If we have to bear the brunt of the anger, it won't be us who will stand in the front. Moreover, for me, the lives of my subordinates are more important than some face. If you cannot stop him, you should know the consequences of Bai Shanshui charging out of Chongling like this. The coachman is one of the true disciples of Cloud Water Palace, Fanzhua. Our Divinity Bureau has been following him for several months in order to obtain more clues from him, especially to find Bai Shanshui's exact whereabouts. Not to mention that we haven't discovered Bai Shanshui's presence here. Even if we did, we would have to rely on Bureau Chief Yi and the Marquis's strength to close the net. In the alley in front of the Jiujiang Commandery meeting hall, Mo Qinggong had arrived. He squatted in front of the Chongling Guard General who had fallen to the ground and said darkly, "Now, even if you die, you have to explain why the Chongling Guard has come here, and why you have made trouble for this caravan." The Chongling Guard General who had fallen to the ground smiled bitterly and said softly with difficulty, "We came here because we discovered that someone was secretly selling the Chu-made gold toad. That was an item from the suspected tomb of the previous emperor that was stolen many years ago. The clues we found were that suspicious people might be in this caravan. Who would have thought it would involve a great rebel like Bai Shanshui?" Mo Qinggong's face turned black, and he was unable to speak. The people of Cloudwater Palace could not be related to the grave robbers from more than a decade ago. Yet there was a clue that led to this place. He was almost instinctively certain that some powerful person was behind this. Without the tiger wolf army fighting to the death along the way, the carriage ran faster and faster. More water vapor gathered towards the carriage from all directions. When they passed through the streets of Chongling, the entire carriage was wrapped in white clouds and water vapor. Adding on the wind, it did not look like a carriage from a distance, but a carriage moving through the clouds. When they reached the shore of the Wei River that was closest to the Jiujiang Commandery Hall, the two galloping horses saw the rolling waves on the vast river and instinctively wanted to stop. However, the middle-aged driver clapped his hands. The two galloping horses gave a sorrowful cry, but they could not stop. Instead, they charged forward even faster. There was a loud bang. The carriage jumped high into the air and crashed into the river, creating astounding waves. The sturdy carriage could not withstand such a collision and immediately split into pieces of various sizes. The man driving the carriage stood on one of the pieces of the carriage, and the white figure easily stood on the water. Only now did he reveal his true appearance. He was dressed in a white fur robe, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His appearance was extremely handsome, as if he was a delicate young master from a wealthy family. His skin was as white as cream. Time had not left any traces on his face. He looked to be in his 20s. It was impossible to connect him with the sword hero Bai Shui, who had lived in the wilderness for 10 years in order to practice the sword and avoid the pursuit of the cultivators of the Qin dynasty after the Wei dynasty was destroyed. What was even more shocking was that a whirlpool with a radius of dozens of feet surged up not far from his feet. A white shadow swam out from the deep water. Vaguely, it looked like a white carp with a length of dozens of feet. It firmly connected Bai Shui and Fan Zhuo on its back. It was also at this moment that the sound of stormy waves could be heard from the distant port. An enormous armored ship sailed out of the harbor at astounding speed. This giant iron ship was covered in scars and dyed in various colors. It even gave the impression of a giant coral that had emerged from the deep sea. However, this seemingly ancient iron ship was emitting an unimaginable bloody aura, as if it was about to dye the entire surface of the vast and mighty river red. The bow at the front of the ship was a real turtle dragon beast. Red light shot out from the two blood-red eyes of the Ao dragon's head, frightening one's soul. And on top of it stood a white-clothed woman. Her clothes fluttered like a god. Bai Shui did not panic. The white carp under his feet made a half-circle and created a white arc. He looked at the divine-like woman in white and said with a smile, "Bureau Chief Yi is as beautiful as expected. I am looking forward to seeing the true Cloudwater art of our Cloudwater Palace and Bureau Chief Ye's One Sky Water Meet. Pity you came a bit late." The one standing on the turtle dragon's head was naturally Yi Sealing. Her expression was calm as she said coolly, "I have to come even if I leave. I will definitely see Mr. again in the future." Bai Shui put away his smile and said seriously, "I see that Bureau Chief Yi may not be happy in Chongling. Why don't you leave Chongling and travel with me? Wouldn't it be great to travel through the rivers and seas? The scene is beautiful, but you don't even dare to let me get close to you. How can we travel together?" Yi Sealing said with slight disdain, "If you can really let go of your emotions, you will not come to Chongling again, and will not sing and have sword energies in Chongling. You are right. Of course, I cannot let go of my old country and soul. But just now I have not finished speaking." Bai Shui smiled and said, "Of course it is great to sing and travel. But for cultivators like us, fighting against the heavens, fighting against those with millions of soldiers, is that not a happier thing? Also, you once learned the sword from that person. Even if you just want to be safe, how can you be safe in Chongling?" Yi Sealing looked up at the sky. The clear sky above her immediately became filled with dark clouds. "I have my reasons for being in Chongling, but you cannot understand," she said coldly with an expressionless face, not caring if Bai Shui could hear her clearly. "Our aspirations are different. Our paths are not the same. Since that is the case, then farewell." Bai Shui smiled slightly and nodded in greeting. The long tail of the white carp under his feet struck out a huge wave. In an instant, It cut through the river surface and swam at an astonishing speed. In just a few dozen breaths of time, the figures of Bai Shanshui and Fan Zhua had already become two small dots on the distant river surface. No matter how fast the light boat was, it could not catch up. Only the light song of rebellion came in the wind. Outside Fish Market, on the shore of the Wei River, the red-robed woman who rarely walked out of Fish Market had a thin black veil over her face as she watched the two black dots leave. Next to her stood the hunchbacked old man with the black bamboo staff. Hearing the faint singing, her unusually calm voice sounded. "Uncle Sun, do you see? The biggest problem in Chongling is that people are not united. When something happens, they will fail because of their family. Then many people will have to take the blame. They will die for the sake of Chongling and the Qin dynasty's face and progress." It was not easy to find someone who could suppress them, but he was killed by his own people. The hunchbacked old man did not look up. He did not speak, and only hummed. It was unknown whether he was laughing or crying. Chapter 76. Night shrouded Chongling. The stars flashed, and white frost started to form in the mountains as though the white frost was formed from the falling starlight. Ding Ning lay on a simple hammock made from some vines, but did not feel cold at all. The wind and snow he usually endured in the falling parasol wine shop was colder than the cold of autumn. He had a certain understanding of many of the cultivation methods of the Han, Zhao, and Wei kingdoms. However, he did not know much about the cultivation methods and pills of some of the smaller sects that were not mainstream or had taken a different path. But today, Nangong Saishu's yellow quart gold pill from a small sect gave him a great surprise. He closed his eyes tightly and looked inside with his consciousness. He refined the medicinal power that filled his body. Countless little silkworms seemed to have burrowed out of his flesh and blood and slowly swallowed the impurities in the medicinal power that were harmful to cultivators. Because the devouring was extremely slow and gentle, his surroundings were completely silent. Even the impurities in his physical energy that had merged into his flesh and blood were slowly swallowed up. As time slowly passed, the remaining medicinal power in Ding Ning's body grew pure. It was so pure that even the best pills of the South Sun pill sect of the past could not reach this level. The extremely pure medicinal energy and the extremely pure true qi slowly merged, and the true qi in his qi si became more and more viscous and heavy. The threads of physical energy that flowed out of his energy si passed through many of the previously impenetrable tendons in his body and seeped into his bones. This was Realm 2 energy refinement, second-class bone washing. Nangong Kaishu was right. This yellow quart gold pill was enough for an energy refinement third-class cultivator to reach energy refinement second-class. But at this time, Ding Ning's cultivation did not stop advancing. After being swallowed by the countless little silkworms in his body, some of the beneficial medicinal power that had been tightly mixed with the impurities were washed out. The medicinal power of this yellow quart gold pill was used to its fullest potential. At this time, there was still a lot of pure medicinal energy left in his body. So he continued to refine it. His Zhen Qi became even more condensed and heavy, penetrating even deeper, nourishing the places where even his consciousness could not reach before. The night gradually passed. When the first ray of morning light fell on the peak of the mountain, the last of the medicinal power in his body had disappeared. His consciousness stopped in front of the marrow river in the bones that the cultivation practitioners had mentioned. He was only a little bit away from the second realm's superior grade marrow transformation. Ding Ning opened his eyes. Facing the rising sun, he took a deep breath of fresh air. He was very satisfied with the speed of his cultivation advancement, or rather, he was very satisfied with the control he had over his cultivation advancement. According to the rules, they could start their journey in the second half of the night. However, this was not the third day that would determine the outcome of the battle, so there was no point in rushing ahead early. Furthermore, who knew how many dangers were hidden in this kind of magic formation at night? Therefore, all the students who still had the qualifications to continue the trial chose to act after sunrise. A disciple of the Green Vine Sword Academy was roasting a skylark. Beside him were some dried wild oranges. These were obviously the breakfast he had prepared for himself. However, at this moment his body suddenly stiffened. He quickly stood up, and his right hand landed on the sword at his waist. "I advise you not to draw your sword." Following this cold voice, Su Qin's figure slowly passed out of the thin mist at the side. "Especially when I may not want to use my sword against you." He looked at this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple and slowly added, "If I remember correctly, you should be called Shirxia, and the most recent disciple. You come from Changshan Commandery and use the Blue Frost Sword. You only have Energy Refinement second-class cultivation. You have performed well to reach this place and survive this long night, but you are not a match for me." This Green Vine Sword Academy disciple, who had a young face and looked just slightly taller than Ding Ning, had even greater terror and shock in his eyes. He was just an ordinary disciple of the Green Vine Sword Academy. It was a surprise that ordinary people of White Goat Cave would notice his existence and remember his name. However, Su Qin not only remembered his name, but also his birth and cultivation. Su Qin's great memory was just as the legend said. "I am Shirxia." He swallowed hard and tried to calm himself down. "But I do not understand why senior sect brother Su Qin appeared in front of me and did not want to use his sword against me. Does senior sect brother Su Qin feel that my cultivation is not worthy of you using your sword?" Su Qin smiled slightly and shook his head. He said, "I mean, you may have a better choice." Shirxia looked at the skylark that was slightly charred on one side because it had not been flipped. He asked, "What choice?" "According to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, there must be at least one battle each day. You should not have experienced any battle today." Su Qin said coolly, "The choice I give you is to fight me, or fight Ding Ning, who is not far from here. You should know that he has just entered Energy Refinement. You may win against him. I can even guarantee that you will be able to successfully approach him." Shirxia stilled and looked in disbelief at Su Qin. He said in shock, "Why, there are many reasons to have a person withdraw, but I do not think that I need to explain much to you." Su Qin glanced at him and said, "You only need to make your choice. Choose to immediately lose to my sword, or defeat him and obtain more trial time. For disciples like you, the meaning of participating in a trial like this is just to obtain more experience." What does Su Qin want to do? Xia Chongsheng, who was still sleepy, looked at the situation in the Sword Trial Valley and asked in a cold voice, blinking his eyes, "This is a method to chase away beasts." Xia Ro glanced at him and explained softly with a frown, "Some of the hunters in Ba Commandery are able to capture prey that is several times stronger than them. They surround some mountains or river valleys and chase away some wild beasts. Some of the ferocious beasts are forced into a narrow path and kill each other when they meet. Su Qin is restrained by Zhang Yi and cannot act. He chose to restrain Zhang Yi and force others to fight Ding Ning." Xia Chongsheng's expression changed. He could not help but curse, "This person is shameless. All warfare is cunning, and the fittest survive." Next to him, Su Heshan said gravely, "In this trial, other than strength, it is also a competition of strategy. Su Qin is shameless, but he is, as the rumors say. He is quick-witted and changes quickly." Seeing Shirxia get closer and closer to Ding Ning, Xia Ro's frown deepened. But for some reason, today's Ding Ning gave her a different feeling than yesterday. Ding Ning was chewing on a few pieces of orange. There were many wild orange trees in the forest, and it was not far from the time when these wild oranges ripened. Many of the oranges were dry, but they were hanging from the branches. It was easy to pick some. But these wild oranges did not taste good, especially in the early morning. When chewed and drunk like water, it tasted sour. When Ding Ning was so sore that his teeth were a little soft, he saw Shirxia, who was walking over with her head slightly lowered. He felt Shirxia's expression was strange, so he rubbed his cheeks and looked at Shirxia, who slowly walked over.
He was not the first to speak.
"I am called Shirxia. I am a student who entered Green Vine Sword Academy last year." Shirxia stopped dozens of feet away from him and said, I have come to fight you, but this time, I was forced to come by White Goat Cave's senior sect brother Su Qin. Ding Ning stilled slightly. Shi Xia continued, I know this isn't very good, but I want more opportunities to gain experience, so I want to be able to fight with more people in this trial and stay for a longer period of time, so I have no other choice. Ding Ning smiled slightly and said sincerely, this is what I should do. If it was me, I would make the same choice. Shi Xia looked gratefully at Ding Ning and then said, I heard that junior sect brother Ding Ning's understanding of the sword manual is not bad, but you have just reached energy refinement before coming to the sword trial festival. So when we fight later, I will try to control my power to energy refinement second class. Ding Ning felt more and more that this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple was interesting. He laughed again. Originally, there was no need. But if you think this way, I think you will have more opportunities to train. Shi Xia felt that he did not understand Ding Ning's words. But he had finished what he wanted to say, so he did not say anything else. He bowed to Ding Ning and then started to attack. His sword was green in color. It was made of a kind of hard jade, and there were some seemingly messy and fine runes on it. As his true qi continued to surge, the blade of the sword began to emit a biting cold, and layers of blue frost began to condense on it. Ding Ning smiled slightly. He slowly attacked as well. Many little jasmine-like white flowers appeared on the blade. It looked no different from yesterday. Chapter 77. Shi Xia felt that Ding Ning's remnant sword was very beautiful when it bloomed like a white flower. It had an unusual poignant beauty. Ding Ning's expression was calm. He temporarily forgot that he had been forced by Su Qin and gradually felt that this was a fair fight. Please. He solemnly attacked. There was a clear sound of something breaking through the air. The blue sword light attacked Ding Ning's chest and abdomen. Ding Ning held his sword horizontally, but did not truly swing it down to block. The indigo sword light was not as straight as most of the sword moves of the Qin dynasty. As Shi Xia's body and wrist moved slightly, this indigo sword light seemed to twist in the air like a waving vine. When the tip of the sword came close to Ding Ning, it was already stabbing towards Ding Ning's neck above his chest. This is the famous vine sword style of the Green Vine Sword Academy. Seeing Shi Xia attack, Xie Rou said softly to Xie Chongqing next to her, the sword moves of this sword style are very unique. It is a winding move, like the candy sticks you played when you were young. When you are familiar with the sword moves when you reach Realm 5 and can use flying swords, the flying swords will be very familiar with this kind of move. The opponent will have a harder time grasping the tip of the sword or the true direction of the sword when it reaches them. Xie Chongqing nodded with a serious expression. Just like this sword. It appeared to stab towards the abdomen, but when the sword moved around, it stabbed upwards. If the other was already on guard, it would be too late for them to react when they discovered something was wrong and moved upwards. When it came to a fight between flying swords, even a moment of thought could decide life and death. He understood that Xie Rou had purposely said this to him so that his gaze would not only fall on the outcome of the battle, but also on the sword moves. Beside the two, Su Hashan's eyebrows rose slightly, a strange light flashing through his eyes. Because as the two of them spoke, Ding Ning had already blocked this sword strike. Ding Ning's last flower remnant sword rose up and held it in front of his throat. He accurately used the back of the sword to block the tip of the indigo frost sword. Then he launched a counterattack. He leaped out and passed by Shi Xia. The remnant sword quickly stabbed towards Shi Xia's throat as he waved his arm. Shi Xia didn't panic. She didn't have time to retract her sword, so her entire arm swung in place. Her blue frost sword drew an arc and cut towards Ding Ning's arm. Ding Ning retracted his arm slightly, and the tip of his sword once again clashed with the tip of Shi Xia's blue frost sword. A spark floated up. Shi Xia took half a step back. His movements abruptly opened and closed. The entire sword was either slapped or swung, swaying back and forth beside him. For a moment, it was as if several twisting green vines had grown beside him. Ding Ning's body was immediately filled with dense inky green sword shadows. These sword shadows stopped a foot or two in front of him. Because the viewing platform could not hear the sound of the two swords colliding, it felt as though the two swords had not truly touched in the next dozen breaths. Yet, from the layers of sparks that bloomed in the air like golden dandelions, it was possible to know that the two swords had been colliding in these dozen breaths. Shi Xia seems to have suppressed his cultivation. He does not want to have an advantage in power. Right now, the two are competing purely in sword skill, Xie Changsheng said softly with a frown. Su Heshan said in an admiring tone, Ding Ning is very good. The most important part of the Green Vine Sword Academy's vine sword style is the word coil. If the two swords are close, it is easy to be twisted and sent flying. The frost on Shi Xia's blue frost sword has the effect of cleansing and is even more adhesive. However, Ding Ning's every strike is using the tip of his sword against the tip of his sword, or the body of his sword against the tip of his sword. Even in response to Shi Xia's slapping sword moves, he does not give the other's sword a chance to come close. His sword is actually very good. Xie Rou nodded and said softly, while it is incomplete, the power after the infusion of physical energy is not weak. The blade is short, but it is very suitable for complex and dense sword moves like the wildfire sword, which can quickly change in short distances. I take back the saying that this is a broken sword. Xie Changsheng looked gravely at Ding Ning's sword and said, but Ding Ning is completely on the defense. How can he win? Su Heshan said solemnly, as long as one has enough patience and does not make a mistake, the opponent can make a mistake. The respect in Shi Xia's eyes grew stronger. Looking at Ding Ning's calm gaze and his sword moves that were becoming more and more precise and skilled, he even felt that he had become a training target. He knew that he had to use an even stronger sword move to have a chance of winning against Ding Ning. He took a deep breath. As he sent out the sword in his hand again, his left hand that had been secretly accumulating power hit the hilt of the blue frost sword with astounding speed. A wave of energy flowed along the hilt and exploded along the blade. There was a soft crack. The frost on the blue frost sword had grown thicker and thicker until it became a hard shell of frost. Now these frost shells split open, like 4 or 5 sharp sword fragments shooting forward. These frost shells were thin and sharp, unlike the fallen leaves that He Xiaoxi had swept up previously. If one was hit by any of the frost shells, it was no different from being stabbed by a thin sword. Many people on the viewing platform narrowed their eyes. This sword was clearly the key to victory. Ding Ning's expression was still calm. Pew 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 pew, several rapid sounds. The last flower remnant sword in his hand rapidly swept across these frost shells. He did not use much power. His sword move was just for speed. While these thin frost shells were sharp, they were very brittle and easily shattered. All of the frost shells that shot towards him shattered in an instant. In the next instant, he let out a low roar. His sword swung horizontally, fiercely slamming against the blue frost sword that was thrusting towards him. Shi Xia stilled slightly. Previously, he had been the one to force Ding Ning to cross swords with him. He had not expected Ding Ning to use such a sword move. He knew something was wrong and immediately howled. His physical energy surged into his sword, and a layer of frost appeared on the blue frost sword. With a pop, the physical energy attached to the two swords collided and created a wave of energy mixed with fine frost. Shi Xia twisted his body with great familiarity. He turned his wrist and was about to twist Ding Ning's sword out of his hand. But in this moment, Ding Ning took half a step forward. His body tensed as he gripped the sword hilt and put his weight on it. Shi Xia felt as though an enormous rock was pressing down on his sword, and he could not flip it. With a hiss like shaving ice, Ding Ning's sword quickly cut down along his sword and caused the layer of frost that had just formed on his sword to scatter. The blue frost sprayed onto Shi Xia's clothes and face. In an instant, Shi Xia's eyebrows and hair turned blue. Shi Xia felt a chill. He pulled back his sword and leapt backwards. Ding Ning's sword left his sword, but in an instant, it shook and slapped. With this shake and slap, The fine white flowers and blue frost formed from physical energy suddenly sped up and hit Xia's face like a stream of water. Xia couldn't help but close his eyes. At this moment, he felt a cold sword essence rapidly attacking his lower abdomen. He shouted and swung his sword towards the back of the icy sword essence. However, the cold sword intent quickly retracted and instantly reached his left rib. Xia forced his eyes open and swung his sword again. But he only saw a patch of fine white flowers moving towards his left rib. Ding Ning's inky green remnant sword had restrained all of its physical energy. It silently moved through the air like a shadow and reached his right shoulder. His pupils contracted violently, and his body suddenly froze. There was a soft snap. The dark green sword in Ding Ning's hand patted his shoulder, and then he put it away. Then Ding Ning took a step back and stopped attacking with his sword. Many people on the viewing platform heaved a sigh of relief. Cheers sounded from where the White Goat Cave disciples were gathered. I had not thought he could win like this. Xie Chongsheng took a deep breath. He was certain that if it had been him, just now, he might not have been able to dodge Xia's attack, much less launch such a satisfying counterattack and win. Su Heshan and Xiero were silent. While they hoped that Ding Ning could win, Ding Ning's perfect victory in a pure competition of sword skills still gave them a great shock. Xia's mind was slightly blank. He could not believe that Ding Ning had defeated him like this. But after a long while, he recovered. He glanced at his right shoulder. He knew just now, if Ding Ning's sword had come down, even without any physical energy, it would have been enough to cut off his right arm. I have lost. He bowed to Ding Ning in admiration. Junior sect brother Ding Ning, your sword skills are exquisite and ordinary people cannot compare. Principal D, are you satisfied with Ding Ning's performance? On the viewing platform, Xue Wangxiu, covered in a thin blanket, stroked his beard and smiled as he spoke to Di Qingmei. Di Qingmei wanted to maintain his calm, but his brows could not help but tremble. In the end, his face was ashen. Do not have such an ugly expression. But Xue Wangxiu looked calmly at him and said softly, no matter what you think of me, White Goat and Green Vine are one. In the future, you and I may have more glory because we have a disciple like this. Di Qingmei's heart suddenly shook. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Xue Wangxiu. Xue Wangxiu smiled faintly and looked at the white clouds in the sky. He said softly with slight sadness, White Goat Cave is fated to not exist. The more you care about this competition, the more you remind others that White Goat Cave still exists. You should change your position and think. Ding Ning is my student, but he can also be your student. If one is not broad-minded and cannot even tolerate the sky, how can one tolerate these mountains and move these distant mountains? Xue Wangxiu said coolly after pause. Di Qingmei's heart suddenly beat rapidly, and his hands started to tremble. Chapter 78. Di Qingmei was not an ordinary person. Xue Wangxiu's words gave him, who had been at the door of Realm 7 for many years, many insights. His hands trembled as he asked in an incredulous tone, why are you telling me this? Do not forget, both White Goat Cave and Green Vine Sword Academy first belonged to the Qin dynasty. No matter what identity you and I have, we are first of the Qin people. Xue Wangxiu glanced at Di Qingmei and said calmly, His Majesty and the Empress can tolerate me and my senior sect brother because they know we will first put ourselves in the position of the Qin people. When necessary, our swords will always face the enemies of the Qin dynasty. As to cultivation, at my age, I do not fear being surpassed or overtaken. My enemy can only be myself and my age. Di Qingmei's hands trembled even more violently. He felt he was very small under his robes. He felt Xue Wangxiu, who was looking at the distant mountains, seemed to be one with the sky and the distant mountains. Xue Wangxiu, I am not as good as you. When his hands stopped trembling, he lowered his head and said softly, That may not be the case. Xue Wangxiu said calmly, My path is almost at the end, but your path is still far. The future will depend on how you walk. In the sword trial valley, Xia, who had accepted his defeat, took off the token hanging from his waist and was about to hand it to Ding Ning. So fragrant. But at this time, Ding Ning sniffed and said, "Do you smell it?" Xia stilled. He took a few deep breaths and felt carefully. There seemed to be a faint fragrance of roasted meat. This was definitely not the half-burnt skylark that he had just eaten. Instead, it was the aroma of roasted meat that was full of oil. "Do you want to go and see?" Looking at Ding Ning's expression, Xia could not help but remind him kindly. "That may be a trap. You have already won against me today. You only need to reach the designated area to pass." Ding Ning chuckled and said, "Although I ate a few wild oranges, eating this kind of sour thing on an empty stomach makes my stomach churn constantly. It's very uncomfortable. I must have something solid to fill my stomach so that I can have enough strength." Xia had always placed himself and Ding Ning in the position of the weak. He had never thought that Ding Ning would choose to smell the fragrance and take the initiative to find an opponent. Thinking of the possible fierce battle that awaited Ding Ning and the exquisite sword moves that Ding Ning had displayed just now, his gaze suddenly became fervent. He could not help but blurt out, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, can I go with you to take a look?" Ding Ning glanced at him and smiled. "I have no objections. I just don't know if the teachers of your Green Vine Sword Academy will have any objections. After all, this kind of trial prohibits two people from traveling together." As if waking from a dream, Xia threw the token to Ding Ning and said, "I admit defeat first, so I will not be considered traveling together. If a teacher wants me to leave the valley immediately, I will ask him to give me some time. After all, it will take a lot of time to rush back to the observation platform. I may miss a lot of things." Ding Ning smiled slightly and did not speak. He started to move towards the direction of the fragrance. Xia was afraid that being too close to Ding Ning would affect the trial, so he only followed Ding Ning from a distance. After passing through several vine walls, he was even more shocked. Only now did he smell a clear fragrance in the wind. Ding Ning's sense of smell seemed to be many times more sensitive than his. Some orange color appeared in front of Ding Ning. But the orange color was very bright. Unlike the dry and dark color of wild oranges, it was a wild persimmon tree. Looking at the ripe persimmons that still had some frost on their skin, Ding Ning smiled in satisfaction. He nodded to the person under the tree and said, "Chongling says that frosted red persimmons are as sweet as honey. In the past, I loved to eat this kind of persimmons the most. Senior sect brother, Yiming really knows how to find a place." The person sitting under the wild persimmon tree with many red persimmons was dressed in the robes of White Goat Cave. He looked to be 4 or 5 years older than Ding Ning. It was Yiming who had been waiting at the gates of White Goat Cave when Ding Ning had first entered White Goat Cave. At this time, he was sitting on a rock under the wild persimmon tree, roasting a wild boar leg. Next to the fire was the black wild boar, with one leg cut off. This was a leisurely and well-fed scene. But when he heard Ding Ning say this, Yiming frowned and did not know what to say. When he walked closer and saw his expression, Ding Ning laughed again. "You were forced by senior sect brother Su Qin to purposefully wait for me here?" Yiming was shocked. "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, how do you know?" Ding Ning pointed at the thin mist behind him. "Because there is a precedent." Yiming finally saw that there was a Green Vine Sword School disciple there, and stilled. "He is called Xia, a student of Green Vine Sword Academy. I won against him, and he came with me to see," Ding Ning said directly, and then rubbed his stomach. He looked at the golden wild boar leg in Yiming's hand and said seriously, "My stomach is uncomfortable right now. Senior sect brother, Yiming, why don't you treat me to something to eat first?" The shock in Yiming's eyes grew, but then he hesitated. Did senior sect brother Su Qin hunt this as well? But this does not matter. Regardless of whether you win or I win, will he be merciful to the winner in the following trials? Ding Ning twisted his lips and seemed to see through Yiming's thoughts. He said, "What is the big deal about eating his roasted boar leg?" Yiming thought and then said, "That is reasonable. Junior sect brother Ding Ning, please. The wild boar meat in the mountains is very fragrant. Senior sect brother is very good at roasting meat. It is a pity he lacks some salt and can only use this persimmon to adjust the flavor. One side is hot and greasy. The other side is raw, cold, fresh, and sweet. You eat meat and persimmon. Be careful of diarrhea. No matter. He Xiaoxi ate a lot of raw meat and did not have diarrhea. His example tells me that intense exercise can strengthen the stomach. In any case, I am going to fight with senior sect brother later. He Xiaoxi? You have seen He Xiaoxi? Yes, he lost to me. Didn't senior sect brother Su Qin tell you? Yiming's brow slowly furrowed. He looked at Ding Ning, who had cut off half of the boar leg. His expression grew more serious. He finally could not help but say, Junior sect brother Ding Ning, I know you have extraordinary talent, but a person must be honest. You are so young. How can you think of making such a lie to scare me? You think this will scare me? Ding Ning looked up. His gaze moved from the half of the wild persimmon in his hand to Yi Ming's serious face. He said helplessly, Senior sect brother Yi Ming, I am speaking the truth. You still do not know how to repent. Yi Ming's expression grew uglier. He put down the boar bone in his hand and slowly stood up. Since this is the case, then let me see how strong junior sect brother's sword is. Ding Ning looked seriously at him and protested. I am not full yet. Yi Ming took a deep breath and said, It is not good to eat too much. Also, according to what you said, there are people waiting to see your fight. Ding Ning wiped his hands and suddenly thought of something. He said, Senior sect brother Yi Ming, actually, the robes I am wearing right now are He Xiaoxi's. I do not know where you got this green vine sword academy robe, but you think this can scare me? What Ding Ning did not expect was that Yi Ming grew even more furious. He shouted, You think I can believe you can beat He Xiaoxi to the ground and take off his robes? That scene was so beautiful that Ding Ning did not dare to imagine it. So he reluctantly stood up and walked to the empty space at the side. He helplessly pulled out the last flower remnant sword and said to Yi Ming, Senior sect brother Yi Ming, please. Yi Ming pulled out the long sword on his back with a dark expression. Knowing that Ding Ning cultivated the wildfire sword manual that focused on defense, he did not speak. His figure flickered, and his sword went to the center and stabbed towards Ding Ning's chest. This attack was unusually simple. His sword was the most ordinary black iron sword of the Qin dynasty. There was only a seal script on the center of the sword that stretched straight to the tip. This seal script could only turn the vital energy inside into sword energy and charge out from the tip of the sword. It was not as profound as other swords. However, at this moment, his sword was very much in line with the sword intent of his sword. When it was a few feet from Ding Ning's chest, a white sword energy charged out of the tip of the sword with a hiss. It was like a white goat's horn that suddenly extended. As it rose, it curved and headed towards Ding Ning's chin. Yi Ming cultivated the most authentic white goat sword manual of White Goat Cave. This attack was the famous white goat hanging horn. Ding Ning thought for a moment. He thought of the fastest way to defeat Yi Ming. So in this moment, he took a step back. Then he used all his power. His vital energy surged out of his body into the last flower remnant sword in his hand. The inky green sword covered in fine cracks gave off many hissing sounds. Tiny white flowers immediately covered the entire sword. Then he swung his sword to meet this white goat horn. Watching from a distance, Xiao's breathing paused slightly. He felt something was wrong, but before he had time to think, Ding Ning's sword collided with the raised white goat horn. There was an explosion. Ding Ning clearly could not fight back and took a step back. Yi Ming's sword froze in the air. He was slightly bewildered. But when he sensed the presence of the tiny white flowers and the vibrating power on his sword, he finally understood. Just a dozen breaths ago, he had said that Ding Ning was using He Xiaoxi to scare him and that he could not be frightened. Yet in this moment, he seemed to see something terrifying. He opened his mouth and shouted in confusion. What is going on? How can he have cultivation above energy refinement second class? How can he have cultivation close to energy refinement first class? Chapter 79. Ding Ning took a step forward, and the remnant sword with tiny white flowers cut towards Yi Ming's wrist. Because he had been forced back a step, Ding Ning's counterattack was not fast. But because Yi Ming was too shocked, his movements were even slower. He wanted to pull back his sword, but in this moment, he found that Ding Ning's sword was already cutting towards his fingers. At such a short distance, he did not have time to make any more changes. So he could only let go and abandon his sword. Ding Ning's sword hit the hilt of his sword, causing the sword to fly to the side and out of Yi Ming's range of control. Then he stopped and did not attack. He looked apologetically at Yi Ming and said, "Apologies, senior sect brother Yi Ming." Because he was too shocked, Yi Ming did not care that Ding Ning had defeated him while he was distracted. He looked with wide eyes at Ding Ning and asked again, "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, you just had a breakthrough. How come your cultivation is close to energy refinement first class?" Ding Ning could understand his emotions and explained calmly, "Nangong Kaishu gave me a pill medicine. I swallowed it when I was fighting He Zhaoxi, so I had such a cultivation advancement." He really won against He Zhaoxi? Nangong Kaishu and Ding Ning should have only met when they were cultivating in the library cave. The two had such a relationship that she even gave Ding Ning a pill medicine that could increase cultivation? Yi Ming started to believe that Ding Ning's words were true. He looked dazedly at Ding Ning and could not help but say, "No wonder you rejected Xiao without hesitation. So it is because of Nangong Kaishu." Hearing this, Ding Ning had a bitter expression and said, "Senior sect brother Yi Ming, your thoughts and considerations are too jumpy. I cannot have a good conversation with you like this. It's only now that I understand the meaning of your words." Shixia walked to Ding Ning's side and bowed seriously to Ding Ning. She said softly, "When I fought with you earlier, I said that I would do my best to control my strength to the low level of qi refining. You said that if I did that, I would have more opportunities to train. It turns out that your true cultivation is already above mine. If both of us use our full strength, you will be able to defeat me very quickly and easily. However, you also intentionally suppressed your strength to the low level of qi refining to fight me. Through a pure contest of sword skills with me, I learned a lot, so I have to thank you." Ding Ning said calmly, "I made that choice because you made that choice first, so you don't have to thank me." Shixia bowed once more. Without saying anything more, he turned around and left. "You defeated him with just your sword skills?" Yi Ming looked at the departing Shixia with an expression of disbelief. "Junior sect brother Ding Ning, it has only been a month. How did you cultivate?" "Senior sect brother, you have too many questions. I can't explain it to you right now. Why don't you go to the viewing platform and ask me what happened?" Ding Ning really couldn't take it anymore. He reached out to Yi Ming and said, "Give me the token." Not far from where Ding Ning and Yi Ming were fighting, Zhang Yi and Su Qin stood on top of two old pine trees covered in vines. Junior sect brother Ding Ning is indeed a one-in-a-million genius. As senior sect brothers, we should do our best to help him. How can we plot against him?" Seeing Yi Ming hand over the token and leave, Zhang Yi turned around and tried to persuade Su Qin, whose face was as cold as water. Su Qin glanced at him coldly. His figure moved, and he swept down from the old pine tree and was about to leave. Zhang Yi was finally a little annoyed. He stomped his feet, and the old pine tree under his feet was instantly shaken into innumerable dry needles that flew out. "Junior sect brother Su Qin, what are you thinking?" he said angrily. Su Qin turned to look at him and said with a cold smile, "It's not the first day you know me. You should know that I, Su Qin, have never given up halfway. Don't think about driving anyone to fight junior sect brother Ding Ning." Zhang Yi floated up from the old pine tree and landed not far from Su Qin. He said word by word, "I will never allow you to do that." Su Qin's eyebrows rose up. Zhang Yi looked at him and said with a determined expression, "If you act like this again, I will act. You will protect him even at the risk of not being able to win in the end?" Su Qin was silent for a moment and said with slight disdain, "If that is the case, then I will let him stay for one more day." Sensing the irrevocable meaning in Su Qin's words, Zhang Yi's brow furrowed deeply. Su Qin turned and left. He expressionlessly looked at the fallen leaves at the bottom of his boots. He looked at the fallen leaves that had sunk deep into the mud because of his feet. They would eventually mix with the mud and become a part of the mud. More coldness appeared at the corners of his mouth. He and Zhang Yi had fundamentally different views of Ding Ning and his fellow sect members. Zhang Yi said they had to help each other, but in his eyes, in the world of cultivators, there were only two possibilities: step on people or be stepped on. If they could not step on people to advance, they would slowly rot like these fallen leaves in the mud and become the most ordinary and inconspicuous part. The more conspicuous and extraordinary a person was, such as Zhang Yi and Ding Ning, they had to be stepped on as soon as possible. He envied talent, but did not fear becoming enemies with these people. Because if he feared even the talent of his opponent, what courage would he have to defeat stronger opponents in the future and cross the dangerous barriers on the path of cultivation? 4 pillars of smoke lit up. Su Qin slowly walked towards the area where the 4 pillars of smoke lit up. At the same time, a Green Vine Sword Academy disciple who did not look outstanding and kept a low profile slowly walked towards the direction of the smoke. From time to time, his right hand would reach into his bosom and touch the small sword wrapped in cloth. The presence given off by the sword caused warmth to surge through his body, and he even forgot his hunger and thirst. He was Mo Chen. Suddenly, he stopped. A student also dressed in the robes of the Green Vine Sword Academy walked out of the thin mist in front of him. This was a very tall young man. On his back were 2 long swords with golden hilts. Senior sect brother Mo, I am sorry. Looking at Mo Chen, this youth bowed apologetically and pulled out the 2 long swords on his back. I have not fought today. Senior sect brother Mo, you should know that there are fewer and fewer opponents.
It is not easy to find one.
Of course, Mo Chen recognized this youth. This youth was Li Danxia. Other than He Zhaoxi, the Green Vine Sword Academy's most likely person to enter the top 3. While his cultivation was not as high as He Zhaoxi, Zhang Yi, and the others, he had reached Realm 2 and entered Vital Energy Realm. Knowing that this was an opponent he could not defeat with his true strength, Mo Chen took a deep breath. His right hand reached into his bosom and tightly gripped the hilt of the small sword. Then he bowed to Li Danxia and said softly, Junior sect brother Li, I am sorry. Li Danxia stilled slightly. He thought that Mo Chen's mood was too heavy and disappointed, so he said something wrong. He coughed a little awkwardly and did not say anything more. He raised the 2 swords in his hands and made a gesture of inviting the other to attack. Mo Chen raised his head. His heart beat like a drum, and his eyes flashed with an unprecedented light. This unusual gaze caused Li Danxia to feel a strong sense of unease. Mo Chen took a deep breath. A wave of physical energy flowed out of his energy sea and poured out of his palm without reservation. Li Danxia's pupils contracted violently. The cloth wrapped around the small sword was torn to pieces by Mo Chen's physical energy. The moment the small silver sword was exposed to the air, the physical energy around the small sword was swallowed up by the dense seal scripts. There was a light explosion. The small silver sword emitted countless dazzling rays of light. Countless strands of light floated up like snow-white dandelions. The rapidly expanding aura even shook off the hair tie that Mo Chen was wearing, causing his long black hair to flutter behind him. In this moment, this square-faced student of the Green Vine Sword Academy, who is usually quiet and inconspicuous, gave off a heart-shaking demonic presence. Li Danxia subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Feeling the terrifying presence coming off the other's sword, he poured his vital energy into the 2 swords in his hands without reservation. The hilts of his 2 swords were gold, but the blades were crimson red. As his vital energy poured in, patches of gold and crimson red light mixed together. The 2 swords were like 2 burning rays of sunset. Mo Chen flew up and swung his sword at the 2 rays of sunset. As he swung his sword, countless scenes appeared in his mind. He saw the people of the Mo Marquisate establishment completely ignore his existence as they walked by. He saw the Mo family of an city living frugally. He saw the expectant gazes of countless people when he left an city for Chongling. He saw himself running into walls everywhere in Chongling and unable to pass the exams of many of the schools he admired. He saw the shadow of the Mo family covering him. He saw himself helplessly writing letters to an city's family. He saw the city's people begging for many dried medicinal herbs that were originally used to prolong the lives of the elders of the family, decorating them with jade boxes and sending them to the home of an important person in Chongling. He saw himself enter the Green Vine Sword Academy in the end, but achieve nothing. In the end, the scene in front of him was this small sword giving off snowy, white dandelions. His heart was filled with injustice. He wanted to cut down those unjust scenes with one blow. The dancing snowy white dandelions and the burning sunset finally met. The color of the sunset in Li Donxia's eyes immediately disappeared. He only saw countless white dandelions flying over. His breathing completely stopped. A huge force surged over, and the two swords in his hands were all broken in the middle. The flying swords instead slashed onto his body. 2 streams of blood sprayed out of his body. In the next moment, he uncontrollably retreated more than a dozen steps and sat down on the ground. Chapter 80. The viewing platform was in an uproar. Xie Chongxing turned in shock to look at Xie Ro and asked, "Sister, what sword is he using?" "The sword energy is like snow and dandelion flowers. He is only in Vital Energy Realm but can produce power greater than Vital Energy Realm 3rd class. This can only be the Snow Dandelion Sword." Xie Ro took a deep breath and said slowly. Xie Chongxing and Su Heshan exchanged a look and said emotionally, "The Snow Dandelion Sword forged by Ji Tianxue of the Divine Craftsman Workshop of the Chu Dynasty?" Xie Ro took another deep breath and turned to look at the two. She said, "Compared to the power of this sword, I want to know why this sword is in his hands and here." Xie Chongxing and Su Heshan's gazes immediately stopped on Duanmu Lian, who was nearby. The Snow Dandelion Sword was a famed sword in the Chu Dynasty. The Divine Craftsman Workshop was also the workshop of the Imperial Palace. Only a true member of the Imperial family could have such a famed sword. Duanmu Lian's eyes were filled with absolute shock. This trial had given the Green Vine Sword Academy too many surprises. Of course, he did not know how an ordinary disciple like Mo Qin could have such a sword. "This is not fair." A grave voice sounded. Everyone turned their heads and found that the person speaking was He Zhaoxi, who rarely spoke and only used his time to cultivate. "This is not fair." Facing everyone's gazes, He Zhaoxi repeated his words. Then he looked at Duanmu Lian and said, "Just the power of this Snow Dandelion Sword is enough to defeat most of the participants of the Sword Trial Festival. This is the case for anyone who holds the sword. This has nothing to do with the cultivator's strength." Duanmu Lian knew that He Zhaoxi spoke the truth. Especially in a place like the Sword Trial Valley, other Vital Energy Realm cultivators could not replenish their vital energy after they used it. But Mo Qin, who had the Snow Dandelion Sword, could always release Vital Energy Realm power. However, the rules of the Sword Trial Festival did not stipulate this. In reality, each person's sword was different. Some people's swords had unique uses, and there were differences in quality. However, they were not as shocking as the sword in Mo Qin's hand. So Duanmu Lian could not make a decision. He turned to look at Xue Wangxiu and Di Qingmei on the viewing platform. "What do you think?" After only one night, Di Qingmei's eyes were less vicious and more peaceful. He asked Xue Wangxiu softly. Xue Wangxiu looked at him and smiled. "My opinion should be the same as yours." Di Qingmei nodded and turned to look at the hesitant Duanmu Lian. He said slowly, "No matter." He Zhaoxi stilled. He opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but Di Qingmei's gaze landed on him. Di Qingmei continued, "Rules are rules. The rules that have been set cannot be changed. Also, even if Mo Qin has such a sword, I am certain that there are people in this valley who can defeat him. Moreover, Since Emo-chun had such a sword, it meant that he had a wider world ahead of him compared to others. If a disciple like this can get one of the 3 seats, I think it is a good thing. The rewards of the Sword Trial Festival will be of great help to him. The viewing platform became silent again. Everyone pondered Di Qingmei's words and gradually felt that Di Qingmei's decision was not a problem as a sect master and considering the future of the entire sword school. He Zhaoxi's brows slowly relaxed. He bowed slightly to Di Qingmei and did not object. Night once again fell on the Sword Trial Valley. The Sword Trial Valley once again became peaceful. During the coldest time of the night, many of the spectating students all stood up at the same time, once again gathering on several viewing platforms. A line of smoke that signaled departure lit up. Many sparks rose into the sky in a beautiful sight. A Green Vine Sword Academy disciple started to run quickly in the darkness. This was the last day. According to the rules of the Sword Trial Festival, whoever could reach the exit of the Sword Trial Valley the fastest and obtain a green suet jade placed at the exit would be the final winner. A trial like this naturally required intelligence. So this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple had traveled many miles before entering the designated area in the day and found a safe path to the exit. While this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple had used up a lot of energy during the day and was extremely tired, he was filled with confidence and thought he could reach the exit of the Sword Trial Valley as quickly as possible. However, after running for half the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he suddenly stopped when he saw that he was not far from the Sword Trial Valley. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. In the day, there should have been a passage in front of him. But now, the passage in front of him had disappeared, and there was only an unusually thick wall of vines. After being stunned for a few breaths of time, he walked forward a little, wanting to make sure that he wasn't mistaken. Just a few steps away, the silent wall of vines in front of him suddenly moved. With many hissing sounds, dozens of vines shot out at the same time. This Green Vine Sword Academy disciple shouted in shock. As he swung his sword, there were continuous explosions and sparks. The dozens of vines attacking him were all thick vines with skin as hard as steel. The sword in his hand was knocked away in a breath's time. Under his despairing gaze, dozens of vines surged onto his body at the same time, wrapping him up like a dumpling. A Green Vine Sword Academy teacher floated down from above. The vines wrapped around this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple scattered like water. Then the Green Vine Sword Academy teacher took this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple who had lost the right to continue fighting and left. After a few dozen breaths of time, the thin mist that had just calmed down surged, and Su Qin's tall figure appeared unhurriedly. He stopped at where this Green Vine Sword Academy disciple had been, and stared at the wall of vines that had not appeared during the day. After confirming that this wall of vines had completely blocked off all the passages leading to the exit of the canyon, and sensing the slow loss of the primal energies of the universe from all the vines in this wall of vines, he was completely at ease. He sat down cross-legged and then closed his eyes to rest. Almost at the same time, Ding Ning arrived at the other side of the wall of vines. He could sense the changes in the primal energies of the universe even more clearly than Su Qin. He could even sense that this wall of vines extended horizontally as though it was connected to the 2 sides of the mountain. Based on the speed at which the primal energies of the universe were dissipating, this wall of vines would not disappear before tomorrow's noon. So he picked a clean rock nearby and lay down, closing his eyes to sleep and wait for the sunrise. The sky gradually brightened. The darkness gradually faded. When the first ray of light fell into the valley, all the students on the viewing platform who were still awake exclaimed at the same time. These exclamations also woke up the sleeping students. Then, the students who were woken up immediately exclaimed in surprise. All of the light blue mist started to dissipate. Most of the lush vines started to wither and yellow. All of the leaves started to fall. The entire Sword Trial Valley suddenly became clear and bright. Only the wall of vines that was dozens of feet wide and as straight as a city wall still existed on the 2 sides of the valley. In front of this almost impenetrable wall of vines, there were only 7 figures left. Ding Ning, Nangong Kaishu, Zhang Yi, Su Qin, Mo Chen. Other than these 5, there were 2 other students from the Green Vine Sword Academy, Lu Yongguang and Mu Liunyan. Looking down from above, these 7 people were scattered all over the place. As the surrounding vines withered, it was only then that he could clearly see the positions of the people around him. However, all of them were actually not far from each other. Among them, the closest one was only 100 feet away. It seems that it's time to end it completely. Ding Ning stretched and looked at the people around him. His expression was still calm. It is finally time. A cold smile appeared on Su Qin's face. His gaze swept across everyone and finally stopped on Mo Chen's face. Then, before anyone else could make a move, he was the first to walk towards Mo Chen. What does he want to do? This was a particularly visually impactful day for all the spectators. Many people, who had just recovered from their shock, looked at Su Qin's actions and couldn't help but speak. First, deal with the weakest in his eyes. This way, including him, there will only be 6 left. Ku Shichuan, who had not spoken for a long time, said coldly, Zhang Yi, Ding Ning and Nangong Kaishu are clearly on the same side. After he deals with the weakest in his eyes, he will use this to persuade the other 2 to be on the same side. Xie Chongxing and Su Heshan exchanged a look. While the 2 of them disliked Ku Shichuan, they felt that Ku Shichuan was right. Pity that Mo Chen is not the soft persimmon he imagines. Xie Chongxing rejoiced and could not help but say softly. Yet the matter did not develop as he had expected. Seeing Su Qin slowly walk towards him, Mo Chen silently raised his head. Then he gripped the small silver sword and started to channel physical energy into it. A surging aura surged out of the small sword in his hand again, blowing his black hair back again, as if countless demons were twisting and dancing in the air. Su Qin immediately stopped, and his eyes flashed with unusual cold light. I want to first fight Ding Ning. Mo Chen looked at the cold light flashing in his eyes and said softly but firmly. Su Qin stilled slightly, and then smiled faintly. He said, That is wonderful. Chapter 81. Mo Chen stilled slightly. He saw something from the smile on Su Qin's face. Su Qin had already turned around. His gaze landed on Lu Yongguang and Mu Liunyan. Then he walked towards Mu Liunyan, smiled slightly, and said, Please. Mu Liunyan's expression turned cold. At the side, Lu Yongguang's face paled slightly. They had been shocked by the power of the snow dandelion sword in Mo Chen's hand. They did not understand what Su Qin meant by challenging someone in a situation like this. In their view, the more impatient a person was, the more exhausted they would be. They would not be able to fight to the end. Senior sect brother Zhang Yi. Ding Ning's gaze moved away from the snow dandelion sword in Mo Chen's hand. He frowned and said softly to Zhang Yi, If you want to fight, you can fight now. If Su Qin kills Mu Liunyan, he will fight us together with Mo Chen and Lu Yongguang. The 3 of us are weak. Lu Yongguang should not refuse Su Qin's invitation. Zhang Yi's expression was slightly bitter. He said softly, Junior sect brother Su Qin is fighting against outsiders. How can I fight against him first? If it is as you say, then I will fight with all my power and see if I can protect you. Ding Ning stilled. He looked helplessly at him and said seriously, Senior sect brother Zhang Yi, you are too soft-hearted. Zhang Yi turned to look at him and said sincerely, Benevolence, righteousness, and friendship are the most important thing for disciples of a same sect. As the eldest Shixiang, whether others can do it or not, I must set an example first. Ding Ning looked at him and thought of a certain person in the past. He grew silent and thought of the wall in his falling parasol wine shop. You should understand why I have come to find you now. Looking at Mu Liunyan, who had not moved, Su Qin said, Because you are weaker than the others. His voice was calm, but it could immediately incite people's anger. Mu Liunyan's eyes immediately burned. With a clang, his sword was unsheathed. The blade of his sword was also abnormally straight, but as his fingers tightened on the hilt, there was a soft sound on the blade, and many curved thorns popped out. His sword instantly looked like a fishbone. This was the unique fish spine sword of Yanmen County. Every curved thorn could lock the opponent's sword in battle, preventing the opponent's sword from moving according to the momentum. Without any hesitation, the fish spine sword in Mu Liunian's hand instantly transformed into dozens of sword shadows, enveloping Su Qin. These dozens of sword shadows were real shadows left behind by the fish spine sword as it rapidly pierced through the air. Furthermore, they left behind real sword chi, making them look like real swords flying through the air. But facing these sword shadows, Su Qin only smiled mockingly. He waved his left hand, and a vigorous true essence flowed into the sword hilt in his hand. The purple sword swung out. It was just a purple sword shadow, but the dozens of sword shadows that came at him were all shattered. Mu Liunian shouted harshly. The power in his body surged out without reservation. The moment his real sword and Su Qin's sword met, the curved thorns on his sword locked onto Su Qin's sword. But with a bang, he felt his hand heat up. Even though he had locked onto Su Qin's sword, the fish spine sword in his hand was still pulled to the side by an irresistible force. Su Qin smiled faintly. As a wave of true essence flowed in, the sword in his hand quickly curved. A crescent-shaped sword light cut into Mu Liunian's chest. Mu Liunian found to his shock that while he had locked onto Su Qin's sword, in reality, it was Su Qin who had locked onto his sword. Looking at the sword light that cut into his chest, he stopped breathing, released his hand, and flew back. Even so, a bloody light still came out of his chest. Looking at this astounding sword, Emo Chun gripped the snow dandelion sword even tighter. Lu Yongguang's face grew paler. He is really strong. Nangong Kaishu breathed deeply. She looked at the fish spine sword that had fallen off Su Qin's sword like a fishbone. She asked Zhang Yi gravely, "What sword is that in his hand?" Junior sect brother Su Qin's sword is called Purple Su. Zhang Yi looked at her, and Ding Ning. He said gravely, "Along with the wind willow sword manual he cultivates, his sword is like a willow branch in the wind, soft and ever-changing. Also, Junior sect brother Su Qin is both soft and hard. He has improved greatly compared to the past years. I will not attack you because there can be 3 winners in the end." Su Qin put away his sword and looked at the pale Lu Yongguang. He said slowly, "I know your Yongguang sword is not bad. Also, your name has the blue in it. The sword manual I cultivate also has the blue in it. We are fated. You can fight with me and Mo Chen. If we can defeat Zhang Yi, Ding Ning, and Nangong Kaishu, we will be the final winners of the Sword Trial Festival." Lu Yongguang's body shook. He couldn't help but take a deep breath, and the paleness on his face instantly turned into a strange blush. The final victory and the green suet jade are more tempting than any words. It seems that you are unfortunately right. Nangong Saishu's eyes narrowed slightly. Senior sect brother Zhang Yi, you go deal with Mo Chen. I will delay Su Qin. Ding Ning, you go deal with Lu Yongguang. As long as senior sect brother Zhang Yi can defeat Mo Chen, I can delay Su Qin. If Ding Ning can defeat Lu Yongguang, then the 3 of you will be the final winners. If you cannot defeat him, then wait for senior sect brother Zhang. I will do my best to delay for you." Zhang Yi looked at Nangong Kaishu and said hesitantly, "This does not seem good." "Of course not." Ding Ning smiled. Zhang Yi and Nangong Kaishu looked in puzzlement at him. They did not understand why he could smile so brightly at this time. "I have a better choice." Ding Ning looked at the 3 people slowly walking over and said softly, "Senior sect brother Zhang Yi, you go deal with Mo Chen. Nangong Kaishu, you go deal with Lu Yongguang." Zhang Yi and Nangong Kaishu stilled and asked in unison, "What about you?" Ding Ning looked at the 2 as though they were idiots and said, "Only me and Su Qin are left. Of course, I will go deal with Su Qin." Zhang Yi frowned and looked back at Ding Ning as though he was an idiot. "Little sect brother, I do not understand what is so good about your plan." Ding Ning laughed and said, "Her plan is to sacrifice herself. My plan can let the three of us win in the end. Of course, it is not just a little better. Nangong Kaishu looked at Ding Ning as though she was looking at an idiot. All three of us win in the end? You mean you can defeat Su Qin? Ding Ning nodded seriously. I know you do not believe me, but I really can. Zhang Yi and Nangong Kaishu exchanged a look. Little sect brother, I know you are talented, but your words sound like you are sacrificing yourself to trick us. Zhang Yi frowned and said, this is not good. Nangong Kaishu took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. She said, give me a reason to believe you. Ding Ning looked at her and nodded. He said, I have hidden things also. I read the Wind Willow Sword manual carefully in the library cave. At the mention of the library cave, Nangong Kaishu suddenly thought of many things. She grew excited and nervous, but she was still uncertain. She said suspiciously, you really read the Wind Willow Sword manual carefully? Looking at her clear eyes, Ding Ning was slightly embarrassed. He did not even know where the Wind Willow Sword manual was in the library cave. He had not paid attention to this sword manual, but he still had a confident expression. Of course, Zhang Yi said, little sect brother. Ding Ning flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, it's fine if you're soft-hearted, but if you continue to be so wishy-washy, I'll scold you. I choose to believe you, but if you can't do it and I can get the green suet jade, I will give it to you. Don't be so wishy-washy when the time comes. Nangong Kaishu took a deep breath. Her eyes flashed with a determined look. Ding Ning clapped his hands.
Deal.
Little sect brother. Zhang Yi spoke again. Ding Ning frowned and was about to explode. Due to the circumstances, I can only choose to believe you this time, Zhang Yi said immediately. Ding Ning's anger immediately turned to laughter. Eldest sect brother, you are not bad. But to his embarrassment and anger, Zhang Yi walked past him. As he walked quickly towards Mo Chun, he whispered in his ear, but the White Goat Library Cave does not have the Wind Willow Sword Manual. The Wind Willow Sword Manual is Su Qin's family heirloom. So, little junior brother, you still lied. A person must be honest. Especially Nangong Kaishu. This girl is not bad. Zhang Yi, what do you mean? Seeing Zhang Yi walk towards Mo Chun, Su Qin's pupils contracted slightly. He sneered and said, your opponent is me. Choosing an opponent is not something you can decide on your own. Nangong Kaishu raised the fish scale sword in her hand and pointed at Lu Yongguang. Senior sect brother Yongguang, I will test your Yongguang sword. Lu Yongguang stilled slightly and looked towards Su Qin. Su Qin did not understand and frowned at Ding Ning. Ding Ning laughed and said in a fake and nauseating tone, Senior sect brother Su Qin, come fight. Chapter 82. Mo Chun couldn't help but look towards Ding Ning. But Zhang Yi moved slightly and blocked his view of Ding Ning. Zhang Yi looked warmly at him and the snow dandelion sword in his hand. He said politely, your sword is very good, but your cultivation is much weaker than mine.
So you cannot be faster than me.
Unless you can defeat me, your opponent can only be me. Mo Chun's eyebrows rose slightly. He glanced at Su Qin and Ding Ning nearby, and then nodded in greeting. You are right. Hearing Ding Ning's insincere and nauseating call, Su Qin was silent for a moment and then laughed scornfully. You want to delay me and help others, but you think you can delay me? Ding Ning shook his head and said slowly with a smile, I do not want to delay you, but defeat you. Su Qin looked scornfully at him. The night has passed, and the sun has risen. Stop dreaming. You did not believe I could pass the entrance tests of White Goat Cave at the gates of White Goat Cave. You also felt it was impossible. But I proved it to you. I passed the tests and faster than you. Ding Ning put away his smile and looked calmly at him. He said, before this, you also thought I could not defeat He Zhaoxi. But I didn't just defeat him, I also defeated the opponents you drove over. You never understood where my confidence came from, but I am confident I can defeat you now. Su Qin stared at him with a cold gaze. Ding Ning looked back calmly and continued. While I have been in White Goat Cave for the shortest time, White Goat Cave has given me many surprises. Shui, sect Uncle Li Daoji, eldest sect brother Zhang Yi, they are all very cute people. But just like how you did not like me from the start, I also did not like you from the start. You always have the presence of stepping on others to advance. Even your fellow sect brothers who respect and admire you are stepping stones you can step on at any time. I do not want someone like you to stay in White Goat Cave. So, after you lose to me, it is best you disappear from my sight quickly. Otherwise, I will change my methods to deal with you. A smile appeared at the corners of Su Qin's mouth. His eyes shone with true murderousness. You dare to threaten me? Senior sect brother Su Qin, I have said all I want to say, so do not waste words. Ding Ning also smiled. He held his sword across his chest and said, "This is the last time I will call you senior sect brother." Su Qin's expression did not change much, but the killing intent in his eyes grew thicker and thicker, like a flame burning in his eyes. What does this mean? There was dead silence on the viewing platform. Everyone's hearts were filled with disbelief. Ever since Zhang Yi walked towards Mo Chen and Nangong Kaishu stopped Liu Yangguang, Xie Chongqing's fists had tightened. Seeing Ding Ning hold his sword against Su Qin, he could not control his emotions. He walked in front of Ku Shichuan and begged with a lowered head. Ku Shichuan, why don't you say a few more things about Ding Ning? You still do not give up? You think that if I say a few words, Ding Ning can defeat Su Qin? Ku Shichuan looked disdainfully at him and sneered. Since you are so childish, then I will do as you wish. Ding Ning can defeat Su Qin unless the sun rises from the west. Xie Chongqing, is there something wrong with your head? Su Heshan angrily pulled Xie Chongqing back. Even if your childish method can bring luck to Ding Ning, what does Ding Ning have to do with you? Do you have to make a fool of yourself in front of everyone? How does it have nothing to do with me? Hearing Su Heshan's reprimand, Xie Chongqing also roared in anger. Do you know my sister better than I do? Do you think my sister was joking around when she said those words? Since my sister is serious, then he is now my future brother-in-law. Xiero did not pay attention to the argument between Xie Chongqing and Su Heshan. All of her attention was focused on Ding Ning and Su Qin. Do you really think you can defeat Su Qin? She kept repeating this sentence in her heart. Shui Wangshu's eyes were filled with complicated emotions. He looked at Li Daoji nearby, and then at the calm Ding Ning. He said slowly inside, "If you can win, I will beg for your life." Su Qin did not say anything else. Everyone knew he was going to act, so he really did, reaching out with his left hand. His violet reborn sword had a soft body and was usually wrapped around his left arm. At this moment, he reached out with his left hand, and the sword hilt fell into his hand. A purple light spun around his wrist and instantly formed a long sword. With a hum, he swung his sword towards the air in front of him. This sword seemed casual and was far from Ding Ning's body. It could not touch him, but when he swung his sword, a purple crescent sword light jumped out of his sword and appeared in front of Ding Ning's throat. Ding Ning's remnant sword appeared in front of this sword light. The inky green sword was immediately covered in small white flowers. The purple crescent sword light collided with the small white flowers and was immediately shattered. The inky green remnant sword could not avoid being pushed back, and a small line of blood appeared on Ding Ning's throat. Still lacking a bit, Ding Ning's gaze was still calm without any fear. He grinned and showed his white teeth. "Then try this sword." Su Qin coldly spat out these words. The purple long sword in his left hand that had been swinging in the cold autumn wind suddenly straightened. In a flash, his right foot stomped heavily on the ground. His vital energy surged wildly into his left arm, and then into the seal scripts on the purple long sword in his hand. There was a loud bang. His entire body flew through the air. Purple clouds swirled around the purple long sword in his hand, and he stabbed towards Ding Ning's body in an extremely barbaric manner. Everyone on the viewing platform held their breaths. In this moment, all the spectating students felt that Su Qin's sword had become a spear that charged forward with pure speed and power on the battlefield. Ding Ning's pupils contracted violently. His body jumped slightly. He first raised the remnant sword in his hand and then pressed it down. He accurately used the front half of the sword to press down on the tip of Su Qin's sword. An enormous and irresistible power passed through the remnant sword into Ding Ning's body. Ding Ning's body first paused in the air and then fell heavily. Then he accelerated backwards and fell hard into the vine forest behind him. He caused all the remaining yellow leaves in the withered vine forest to fall and dance in the air. Su Qin's eyes gradually narrowed. There was no pride on his face. Ding Ning had stood up among the yellow leaves. He once again raised the eye-catching inky green remnant sword. His left hand wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He once again bared his white teeth at Su Qin and said with a smile, "This sword is still lacking." Nangong Kaishu stood in front of Lu Yongguang, facing the senior sect brother who was half a head taller than her. She looked at Ding Ning's figure falling into the vines and kicking up yellow leaves. She took a deep breath and then exhaled. She gave off an ear-piercing howl. The fish scale sword in her hand attacked in a straight line. At the same time, the green vine short sword stabbed out of her left sleeve. It also moved in a straight line and gave off layers of power. Lu Yongguang stopped breathing. He retreated and swung his long sword with all his power. The sword light seemed to form a shield of light in front of him. There was a loud explosion. His retreating figure suddenly sped up, and he could not steady himself after taking 5 or 6 steps back. Blood dripped from his hand and palm. His face grew pale again. He looked at the bloody path by Nangong Saishu's waist. He breathed rapidly and said in a trembling voice, "You are so seriously wounded. Why do you still use such a strong sword move? You cannot last long like this." Nangong Kaishu looked at him and said unconcernedly, "I do not need to last long. This is the final battle. I only need to defeat you before I fall." Lu Yongguang's voice had only been trembling before, but when he looked at her eyes, his bleeding hand uncontrollably trembled. "Whether or not you can withstand my first 2 attacks is not important. What is important is whether or not you can withstand my 3rd attack." Looking at Ding Ning's provocative smile, Su Qin was not angry. He said softly, "If you cannot withstand my 3rd attack, one of your arms may be completely crippled." Su Qin's voice was dark and cold. Other people would feel great terror, but Ding Ning's gaze was unusually calm. He shook his head and said softly, "Since you say so, then it may be your arm that is crippled." Su Qin was expressionless. He would do whatever it took to complete what he decided to do. He took a deep breath and pushed out all the negative emotions in his body. Then he poured all the vital energy in his body into the purple longsword in his hand. There was a hum. The seal scripts on the purple longsword were so bright they looked like they were about to split. The blade was so smooth it looked like water would drip out. The edge of the sword extended outwards and became thinner. However, the sword did not become even straighter due to the concentration of power. Instead, the entire sword curled slightly, like a slightly curled willow leaf. Chapter 83. Zhang Yi had not attacked in the beginning. He had only been looking worriedly at the battle between Ding Ning and Su Qin. But when he saw Su Qin's vital energy pour out of his body, his expression changed dramatically. His feet paused slightly, and he was about to fly over. Yet at this moment, Mo Chen, who had been motionless all this time, took a deep breath. He channeled all the vital energy stored in his arm into the snow dandelion sword in his hand. Transparent lines appeared in the air between him and Zhang Yi. In the next moment, the snow dandelion sword in his hand seemed to burn and gave off light. His body seemed to be lifted by the power of the snow dandelion sword, flying forward and stabbing towards Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi had a gentle personality. His sword was like green jade and unusually warm. But when he felt the true murderousness in Su Qin's attack, he was not as gentle as usual. A low shout came out of his mouth, and countless white sword chi suddenly surged out of the green jade-like sword body. These sword energies quickly gathered at the tip of the sword. In a moment, it seemed to become a small, white mountain. He used all of his strength to lift the sword and move the small mountain, smashing it towards Emochin. This was the White Goat Mountain-carrying sword. It was one of the most difficult and powerful sword moves in the White Goat Sword Manual to master. There was a loud explosion. Emochin felt as if he had been smashed by a small mountain. Several strands of pure, true essence even directly invaded his chi along with the vibrations of the sword. A surge of blood came out of his mouth. He immediately retreated a dozen steps. Zhang Yi turned around, but there was no joy on his face, because Su Qin had already drawn his sword. Along with the subtle movements of his wrist, the entire purple longsword curled up in a strange way, forming a hollow flood dragon. This hollow flood dragon was like a scabbard that accurately caught Ding Ning's sword move and covered Ding Ning's remnant sword and half of his arm. When Su Qin stabbed, Li Daoji instinctively took a step forward on the viewing platform, and his hand landed on the sword hilt in front of his chest. Almost all the students on the viewing platform felt a strong chill in their hearts. This bastard. Di Qingmei's expression changed dramatically. He was so angry that he almost lost control of the blue energy in his sleeve. Originally, he did not have good intentions towards Ding Ning. But Xue Wangxi's words had not only caused him to gain enlightenment in his cultivation, but also caused him to reflect on his own way of life. His view of Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and the other White Goat Cave disciples had completely changed. At this moment, Su Qin's attack was vicious. Every part of the curled sword had great power. Right now, his sword move covered half of Ding Ning's arm. It was not as simple as just sending Ding Ning's sword flying. If this attack landed, the meridians and bones in half of Ding Ning's arm would shatter. Su Qin had used up all of his vital energy to launch this attack. In terms of speed and power, Ding Ning could not compare. Now, the sword move was like a cage that covered Ding Ning's sword and half of his arm. Even he could not think of a way to defeat this attack. Su Qin is too insidious. How is this a trial by fire between fellow disciples? When Su Qin's sword move first appeared, Xie Chongqing started to curse angrily. Xie Ro could not help but feel cold. She had always been a woman stronger than many men, but at this moment, she felt a strong sense of helplessness. Ku Shichuan had a disdainful smile at the corners of his mouth. In his eyes, the terrifying scene of Ding Ning's arm being mangled and bone flying appeared. But in his view, Ding Ning had asked for this. Everyone could see Su Qin's intentions, but no one could stop Su Qin's attack in time. The spinning sword wrapped around Ding Ning's remnant sword and half of his arm. It started to quickly tighten and curl like a willow leaf losing its moisture. This curling caused different parts of the sword to have different rhythms. It was as if many swords were using different speeds to attack Ding Ning's arm with their edges and bodies. There was not much room to maneuver in this small space. In this kind of space, Ding Ning's arm could not move, and he could not use any exquisite sword moves. Even the power of the peak energy refinement realm was not enough to match Su Qin's vital energy realm power. No one seemed to be able to change the fate of Ding Ning's arm being cut off. However, something strange seemed to be happening in the cold air at this moment. Su Qin looked coldly at Ding Ning. He suddenly felt a strong sense of unease. Because Ding Ning's expression was still very calm and even somewhat at ease. His grip on his sword hilt tightened, and his knuckles grew whiter and whiter. Ding Ning was even more at ease than Su Qin had imagined. In everyone's view, this unsolvable and dangerous attack was nothing to him. Compared to the truly exquisite sword moves of the world, Su Qin's attack was a child's play. Of course, with his true cultivation and realm, there was only one way to deal with Su Qin's attack. However, as long as there was one way, it would be enough. As Su Qin's sword quickly tightened like a dehydrated willow leaf, his physical energy flowed smoothly into the many seal scripts on the last flower remnant sword in his hand. At the same time, they flowed into those tiny cracks that extended like the sword hilt. There were many tiny white flowers on the body of the dark green sword in his hand. They carried a poignant yet beautiful aura as they flew forward and then disappeared. Then the inky green sword truly split open and spread apart. The dark green sword's body was like a blooming flower, dispersing into countless sword threads. Moreover, as the true energy flowed, these sword threads rapidly extended in the air, growing longer and longer. Everyone on the grandstand held their breaths. Everyone, including Di Qingmei, was shocked and perplexed. Some people even lost their souls. How could something like this happen? Ding Ning's arm remained straight and motionless in the shrinking purple longsword. Yet, these flying sword threads landed on Su Qin's palm, Su Qin's wrist, and Su Qin's arm. Many of the edges of Su Qin's purple longsword were only a short distance from Ding Ning's arm. Yet, Ding Ning's expression was still calm, and even his breathing was not disturbed. He only maintained the flow of physical energy and allowed the sword threads to pierce Su Qin's flesh, cut through the tendons in Su Qin's flesh, and even penetrate his bones. In this moment, tiny flowers of blood appeared on Su Qin's sword-wielding hand. His arrogant face instantly turned pale and distorted. He let out an extremely shrill shriek, and like a wounded bird, he flew backwards. The purple longsword was just a hair away from cutting Ding Ning's arm. Yet all the tendons and flesh were cut, and even the bones were riddled with holes. He could not use any more power. A loud crash was heard. The curled purple longsword spun uncontrollably in the air. It collided with many sword threads in the air and created many small sparks. Yet, to the shock of many people on the viewing platform, the sharp edge of this purple longsword could not cut through any of the seemingly small sword threads. After the sword threads scattered and softened for a moment, they quickly recovered their hardness and straightness. They quickly gathered and turned back into an inky green remnant sword. Su Qin screamed as he retreated. His rapid retreat caused the sword threads to bring out more pieces of flesh and bone as they left his arm. His left hand was twisted out of shape like a boneless phoenix claw. As he screamed, he shouted the question many people wanted to ask. What sword is this? Ding Ning's gaze landed on the inky green remnant sword in his hand. He did not answer Su Qin's question and remained silent. At this moment, he was not even thinking about Su Qin's hand. He was thinking about the many stories of this sword and its owner. On the deathly silent viewing platform, Duanmu Lian looked at the inky green remnant sword. The scene of the sword's extension remained in his mind. He finally overlapped this half-broken sword with a famed sword from a long time ago. He said in disbelief, the last flower sword that only cares about what is in front of it and not behind it. Each blow is like the last. This is Ba Mountain Yan Xinlan's last flower sword. Some students on the viewing platform had never heard of this sword. Some had, but because they had not experienced the era before the Yuanwu Emperor's ascension, when many stunning cultivators of the Qin dynasty had disappeared, they were still young. So, at this moment, they did not feel much shock at the story of this sword. But for Di Qingmei and many of the older teachers of the Green Vine Sword Academy, it was completely different. This sword itself was a legend. It represented an attitude that would rather break than bend in many people's eyes. It was an attitude that did not know how to adapt to the situation. However, they had not expected that the inconspicuous broken sword in Ding Ning's hand was the remnant of that sword and could possess such power. Back then, did Li Daoji already see that Ding Ning had such a comprehension of the Wildfire Sword Manual? That was when Ding Ning had just comprehended the Wildfire Sword Manual. Had Ding Ning already comprehended the true meaning of the Wildfire Sword Manual back then? The shock expanded infinitely in Di Qingmei's eyes. He was one of the few great cultivators in Chongling, so he knew the true meaning of the Wildfire Sword Manual was not in the wildfire burning the plains, but that the wildfire could not burn and would grow again when the spring wind blew. When the sword's presence was used up, there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. Just now, while Ding Ning's attack relied on the last flower sword's own characteristics, the The sword essence of the Wildfire Sword Manual was enough to move every great swordsman. At this time, he finally understood why Li Daoji, who had not left White Goat Cave for a long time, had come out and risked a battle to find this remnant sword for Ding Ning. This sword can extend like this. You have always been so confident because you were hiding something like this. Pain and terror finally took over Su Qin's mind. He looked at his bloody left hand that was definitely crippled and could not recover. He laughed crazily. You crippled my hand. You wanted to cripple my hand, so I crippled yours. Hearing his wild laughter, Ding Ning looked up and said in a cold and disdainful voice, "This is your own choice." Chapter 84. A pill medicine to increase cultivation. A sword like this. How many more secrets do you have? Su Qin laughed maniacally. Ding Ning said calmly, "This has nothing to do with you. The key is that your hand that uses the sword is crippled. I can see that you are born left-handed. So even if you use your right hand to practice the sword, your natural disadvantage will cause your sword to be very mediocre." Su Qin's smile completely disappeared. His face began to turn pale, even uglier than the ghost faces in the paintings. A teacher from the Green Vine Sword Academy rushed out of the vine forest with a medicine box towards Su Qin. "Do not come near me." But before he could get close, Su Qin looked at his bloody left hand and screamed at the Green Vine Sword Academy teacher like a wounded beast. The Green Vine Sword Academy teacher stilled and frowned. He was closer to the battlefield than the people on the viewing platform, so he could see what was happening here more clearly. You reap what you sow. He looked coldly at Su Qin, who had lost control of his emotions, and sneered. "Starting today, do you think you are still the genius that needs many people in the sect to revolve around you?" After saying this, he ignored Su Qin, whose hand was still dripping blood, and turned to walk towards where Nangong Kaishu and Lu Yongguang were fighting. Lu Yongguang had lowered his sword. Originally, he had the power to block Nangong Kaishu's attacks. But when he saw Ding Ning and Su Qin's fight end, his remaining courage disappeared. "I admit defeat." He looked down and said to Nangong Kaishu, "Little sect brother." Su Qin, Zhang Yi had not expected such a situation. He did not wish for Ding Ning to be injured. So, he had sent out vital energy without regard for anything to break free of Mo Chen's entanglement. But because of his generous personality, he did not want to see Su Qin end up like this. He knew very well that falling from a genius to a piece of trash inferior to even ordinary cultivators was the most severe punishment for a cultivator. The result of this battle was too unexpected. Even Mo Chen had stopped. In his eyes, the Su Qin who used to be so valiant, who seemed to have everything under his control, and the Su Qin who was now like a ghost, were like people from two different worlds. He looked down and saw the sword in his hand. The him who possessed the snow dandelion sword was a completely different person from the past. The person who had given him the snow dandelion sword had hoped that he could stop Ding Ning from winning. So now, Su Qin and Lu Yongguang had lost. He could not defeat Zhang Yi and affect the final result, but he still felt that he had to do something. So he looked up. Just as Zhang Yi was thinking about what to do, and if there was any way to heal Su Qin's arm, his body turned into a wild gust of wind. He passed by Zhang Yi and charged towards Ding Ning. Almost no one had thought that Mo Chen would act like this when the outcome was already decided. So, even the teacher of the Green Vine Sword Academy stilled. Youth, Zhang Yi also stilled. He could not understand why Mo Chen did this. This is not good. However, he would not allow Mo Chen to cause any harm to Ding Ning. The moment his voice rang out, his entire body turned into a gust of wild wind. Along with the wild wind came a storm. The long sword in his hand was as smooth as jade. At this moment, countless sword shadows turned into a torrential rain, catching up to Mo Chen from behind and enveloping him. Mo Chen's gaze dimmed. He did not attack again. Because of Zhang Yi's attack, he understood that Zhang Yi's words were true. Zhang Yi was much faster than him. He could not break free from Zhang Yi and pose any threat to Ding Ning. Countless rainstorm-like sword energies sprayed around him, shattering countless leaves on the ground around him. Zhang Yi put away his sword and landed in front of him. It is the Ba Mountain Night Rain Sword. Rain scattering banana. On the viewing platform, Di Qingmei frowned and turned to look at Shui Wangxiu. He said softly, "In the first year of Yuanwu, this is a sword manual that must be burned." Shui Wangxiu looked at him and smiled with a hint of undisguised pride. White Goat Cave's library cave has many sword manuals like this. I do not think your actions are right, but I have to admit, even as an opponent, you are worthy of respect. Di Qingmei turned and sighed softly. Su Qin's mad gaze landed on the countless holes on the ground. Sensing the speed and power of Zhang Yi's attack just now, he finally understood that Zhang Yi's usual humility was true humility. Thinking that if it was a fair fight, he could not even win against Zhang Yi, he laughed again. His laughter was sad, and his expression was strange. Zhang Yi frowned. Originally, he wanted to say something. However, when he saw Emo Chen lowering his head and removing the token from his body, he closed his mouth. His expression became gentle again, and he did not say anything else. Yet Ding Ning was not as benevolent as him. The snow dandelion sword in Emo Chen's hand and his last action caused him to immediately understand many things. Li Lingjun used this snow dandelion sword to bribe you? He looked disdainfully at Emo Chen. So, you are willing to die for those who understand you. Even at this time, you want to fight and see if you can kick me out of the top 3? Emo Chen was silent. The snow dandelion sword may be as important to you as your life, but to someone like Li Lingjun, it is just a beautiful decoration. To use such methods to deal with a wine shop youth who does not pose a threat to him, do not imagine him to be so perfect. He is not so noble. Ding Ning looked at him and sneered. Please tell him that I will make him regret provoking an opponent like me in the future. Between him and Emo Chen, Zhang Yi clearly heard Ding Ning's words. His relaxed brows furrowed again. He turned and urged, "Little sect brother, Li Lingjun is in the wrong, but there is no meaning in your quick tongue." Ding Ning said calmly, "There is the words quick in quick tongue. When some words are said, one will feel comfortable and happy. This is the meaning." "Little sect brother, this does not seem to be right," Zhang Yi said softly, depressed. "But I cannot convince you. My life actually has no reason to speak of." Ding Ning raised his head and looked at the morning sun that was warm and not so dazzling in late autumn. He said softly in his heart and showed a satisfied smile on his face. The Sword Trial Festival was an important step for him after he was exposed to the sunlight of Chongling. This step could finally be completed according to his plans. Then the marks on the wall of his home in Falling Parasol could be erased even faster. The viewing platform grew calm again. The vines behind Ding Ning that stretched like a wall gave off hissing sounds. Many thick vines slithered away like water snakes. Countless vines withered. Fallen leaves danced, and the wall of vines disappeared. A flat path appeared in front of Ding Ning, Zhang Yi, and Nangong Kaishu. At the end of the path, at the exit of the Sword Trial Valley, there was a high platform. 3 pieces of green suet jade were placed on the 3 vines on the high platform. "Let's go." Looking at Nangong Kaishu, who had finished treating her wounds, and Zhang Yi, who still had a worried expression, Ding Ning started to walk towards the high platform. At this time, everyone on the viewing platform who had been shocked by his sword finally reacted. This wine shop youth who had reached profound understanding in half a day and energy refinement in a month had become the final victor. The golden sunlight fell on his back. Walking on the flat road covered in yellow leaves, his back seemed incomparably glorious at this time. Yet for some reason, looking at the broken sword at his waist and his overly calm posture, Xia Ro's eyes moistened. She inexplicably felt that every step his thin and weak body took seemed to be abnormally difficult. Beside her, Xia Chongqing did not have such feelings. Thinking of how the brother-in-law he had called so many times was so capable and incredible, his face filled with bright light. He turned around and bowed to Ku Shichuan, whose expression was unknown. He could not disguise his pride. In the end, I still have to thank you. I hope that you will say more about him at the Min Mountain Sword trials. Then he said to Ku Shichuan, who had turned into a statue in the sunlight. Li Daoji's expression did not change, but he was exceptionally satisfied inside. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.